Village of Wheeling Special Workshop is now called to order. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Trustee Lang.
Here.
Trustee Brady.
Here.
Trustee Hine.
Here.
Trustee Argyris.
Here.
Trustee Vogel.
Here.
Trustee Here.
Here.
President Abascado.
Here. Any citizens' concern and complaints?
No, Madam President.
Thank you. Mr. Fundulis.
Thank you, Madam President. This is certainly a new perspective to look at everybody in the daylight. And it's good to see some old faces and some new ones too, so thank you and welcome to our budget workshop for the 2013 budget. I'm going to give some opening remarks before handing it over to Finance Director Monchain to talk in detail about the 2013 proposed budget. Following his comments, we will then go department by department, line item by line item, whatever the board desires to talk about the individual expenditures from each department. Before we get into that presentation, I think it's most appropriate to say some thank yous first and foremost to the board for the 2012 budget. Without the approvals and the vision of the board for last year, we wouldn't be able to serve our residents in the capacity that we do. So I think it's important that we recognize the board for what they have given us in order to allow us to continue to serve our community. I would also like at this point to thank staff. Of course, it's their hard work that recognizes and puts into effect that vision, and this budget is also a reflection of that hard work. So I'd like to acknowledge staff and all their efforts to put together today's presentations and the budget that's before you. I'd like to talk a little bit about, and I promise I'll be brief, a little bit about some global aspects of looking at this budget. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at the details that each department needs in order to perform their services, but I want to look at some of the bigger picture, and I think some of the things that the public needs to hear and that is talked about when we talk about the budget are four main questions. Where does our money come from? Where does it go? What realities do we face? And what have we done? So I'm going to go over briefly some of those answers to guide our discussions throughout the rest of the afternoon. Where does our money come from? The Village of Wheeling, as with any local municipality, really only have three sources of revenue: property taxes, sales taxes, and income taxes. Those three categories provide all the revenue, with rare exception, for all the services that we provide. And as we talk about the budget itself, we need to recognize that our budget is nearly 80% personnel cost. That number is so high because all we do is provide service. We don't sell anything other than water, of course. We provide service, and when that's the case, we depend substantially on whatever source of revenue. As a business would, it would be income from sales. For us, it's taxes. That's what allows us to pay our personnel and provide those services. We are unique at the local level because our budget, for every penny that we collect, we expend an equal amount. We don't provide grant funding. We don't provide donations to other agencies. We don't provide research monies. We don't have any profit margin. Every dollar that we collect is spent back in the community, either through personnel expenditures or through infrastructure improvements. And unlike the private sector, when the economy takes a turn, demand for our services goes up. So it's difficult for us, beyond looking at what our core services are, to say that we need to just eliminate a section of what we do. If you're a car company, you can close a plant if you're not selling cars. For us, it's a little bit different, and I think it's important to recognize that a service industry, specifically at the local level, is very different than any other comparisons. Where does our money go? Our budget, as presented in the document that I think all of you have, is just over $61 million in total and $34 million specifically in the general fund, which is what we're here to talk about today. And as I had said, nearly 80% of that number is in salary and personnel expenses. And that explanation is also an answer to the question, why does our budget look the same every year? It looks the same because we continue to provide the same level of service, which requires obviously personnel expenses, but also the 20% margin, the rest of the general fund budget, that gives us the tools in order to provide that service. So you can see how the scale is tipped clearly towards personnel. What realities are we facing? We have, every year when we look at our budget, we have to recognize that we have at least $1 million in increases every year. That is not providing additional services, that is not buying new equipment, that is not anything other than the personnel costs associated with having well over 200 employees to provide police protection, fire protection, public works service, community development, finance, all the things that the municipality provides to the public. And realizing that we have an increase of $1 million, it's difficult financially to look at our budget and say, okay, how do we cut? Can we cut anything out? Well, cutting is difficult when you're looking at $1 million increase every year. You're never going to be able to cut an equal amount on the other side of the ledger. As I said, the demand for services increase every year, and as they do, the board looks at what core services the village provides. That's a conversation we have every year. I expect we'll have it again today. And that is how we're able to, well, I guess I skipped ahead, I'm sorry. The board has made some decisions in the past to weather that storm, to look at the deficit that comes every year, the $1 million that we know we have to increase. They've made some decisions based on the economy of the day as to how we can offset that $1 million, plus then the rest of our deficit, which we're going to get into, and how to not automatically lay that on the property tax. They've made a number of difficult decisions, looking at SURF accounts, looking at CIP accounts, and we've been successful, I think, in making sure that we are not creating either a unsustainable deficit nor affecting the service that we provide to our community. What has happened, though, is in the last couple of years, we have always thought of the current state of the economy as a temporary situation. We recognize now that, the buzzword out there is new normal, and as much as I don't like buzzwords, it is a reality. We are experiencing the new normal. We don't really anticipate that next year is going to be substantially different when we talk about revenue than it was this year or the year past. So what we need to do is look forward with a policy, with a financial plan as to how to address both the increases that we have every year and the deficit that we have created purposefully by moving some of these funds in order to make our past budgets happen. All that said, what have we done? We have not just accepted the fact that, well, costs go up, so let's just raise taxes and pass the costs along. We've done a number of things. Looking at our budget in particular this year, we have spent the last 3 years cutting from our operating budgets in each department. This year there was a challenge because we've done such dramatic cuts over the last 3 years that there wasn't a lot left to eliminate that wouldn't affect services. And again, services are defined by the village when they set policy as to what our core services are and define those services. But what we did this year was a little bit of trend analysis. Because we couldn't really cut out any large ticket items, we looked at every line item in every department's budget and did a trend analysis for the last 3 years. There are categories in each department. There are line items that have historically had, and I'll just use an example of, say, $50,000 allocated to them. That $50,000, while it is defendable, may not have been the actual amount of money that was spent over the last 3 years. So we took a 3-year trend analysis since we began the cuts and simply lowered all of those line items to match what we are actually spending. So what you're going to see this year is a very realistic budget proposal for next year based on the last 3 years of actual expenditures. In addition to that, I made each department reduce their discretionary spending by 10%. discretionary spending is a concept that we really need to talk about, because when you look at the federal level, there's millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of discretionary spending. When you look at the local level, if you hear that 80% of our budget is personnel related, that leaves 20% for everything else. And that everything else is what allows us to keep the lights on and keep our trucks running and keep gas in the vehicles and all that. There really isn't a lot of discretionary spending. But in order to bring all of our budgets in line, there was an automatic 10% reduction to each of those categories. We've also looked at the way we do business. Obviously, responsible budgeting is a reality for the Village of Wheeling that we've talked about in years past. I remember a couple years ago I said everything I'm going to say is about responsible budgeting, and that holds true this year as well. But what have we done? If we've done all of our cuts, if we've tried to make the budget look as accurate as it needs to in order to provide these services, well, what's left? Well, we've done a number of things over just the last year to change the way we do business. Very recently, the board approved a new concept for our newsletter that in the past was a $40-some thousand expenditure that now is reduced to zero because we changed the way we do business. We're adding local advertising that can help offset the cost of printing the newsletter and therefore create new revenue. We've refinanced hundreds of thousands of dollars in millions of dollars in debt, recognizing hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings for our debt. Because we've had to make decisions about the SURF program in the past, we've instituted new maintenance programs that reviews each vehicle before it is set to be retired and therefore replaced. Through our fleet maintenance superintendent, we've actually only replaced 50% of what was scheduled to be replaced in the last 3 years. That's a huge step in looking at, okay, here's a vehicle, can we make it last? Can we do more with less? Can we stretch this vehicle out? Reducing what was supposed to be done with already a pretty hard replacement program, looking at life cycles of vehicles and then extending it even further. It was a pretty substantial and I think a very positive move. We've eliminated 38 positions in the past 4 years. When the economy first went on the decline, we looked at, again, core services. What does it take to provide those core services? Each department went through a very difficult task of looking how we do what we do and where we can move responsibilities, how we can combine responsibilities, and over the last 4 years, we've eliminated 38 positions. And when you look at, again, the 80% of our budget being personnel, that's a substantial impact to the structural integrity of our budget. What new sources of revenue have we created? Economic development is always the engine that we want to drive our new revenue. We've had a number of restaurants open in the last couple of years. We have a number of very positive opportunities coming with Wix, with Kmart. Economic development is always a very integral role in how we collect our taxes and our ability to offset new taxes. But it's not the only thing. We can't depend on economic development because it's simply unsustainable to think that constant growth is the answer. But again, looking at how we do what we do, we've created new revenue by, for a couple of examples, in Public Works, we now have, in the last 12 months, done a substantial amount of work for the airport, rehabbing their vehicles and then charging them for our services. Our opportunities to do that, of course, are limited because our priority is providing core services, but that alone brought in $150,000 of new revenue by using our shop, our employees, to serve another arm of local government, which in this case is the airport. The police department has signed a contract and the board approved the idea of doing prisoner holding for the city of Prospect Heights. We took advantage of a situation that came to us from the city of Prospect Heights, and our police department was able to accommodate by changing the way they do some of their prisoner holdings and accommodate the prisoners from Prospect Heights, which is another source of revenue. So where does our deficit come from? We talked about the $1 million increase that we face every year. In addition, this year we have a $3.6 million deficit this year, which we're going to talk about in detail. Where does that come from? We have the $1 million that I've already mentioned about increased personnel costs every year, plus $2 million that we've carried over from last year. That money is, the deficit is the money that would make whole the changes that we made in fund distribution last year. CIP accounts, SURF accounts, etc. We have an additional $600,000 plus in new responsibilities. And that comes from a number of areas that Michael will get into, but there's a loss of a number of grants that paid for personnel. There's increased costs for the 911 dispatch facility. There is an agreement at the airport that is going to cause us to expend more monies than we have in the past. And again, we'll get into the dollar for dollar answer to that. But you see how our deficit has come about and what we can and can't do about it. So where do we go from here? Recognizing that we're in the new normal, we need to come up with a plan. And as presented, this budget has a recommendation from staff for a plan to address the new normal. We are doing everything that we can from an operations standpoint to affect what our bottom line is, and now we need to look at our revenue stream and what we can do. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to have a presentation from Finance Director Monchain first that's going to talk in detail. I guess I went on a little longer than I wanted to, but Michael is going to talk in detail about our budget and some of our funds and more about where our money comes from and where it's going. And then we're going to have individual department presentations. They will be short. That will be an opportunity for the board to ask any questions that they may have. And if need be, at noon, we will break for a 1-hour lunch and resume at 1 p.m. Because a budget really is a discussion, I think it makes more sense if I leave my seat here and join staff and sit down there. So I'm going to do that. As Michael, if you would, come to the podium and begin your presentation, and Trustee Lang, if you would like to move down.
Okay, we're going to change things.
Your old seat.
Hi.
Good morning. Let you take your seat, John. As Village Manager Svandilas mentioned, I'm going to give you a view of the general fund budget, the overall budget, including the general fund, from really a view from 35,000 feet. Later in the day, we'll get into the specific line items for each department, and certainly you can ask any questions that you want. We encourage you to do that, but I just want to look at this from an overall perspective. I also want to mention that we have a few extra copies of the budget here for anybody who is in the audience who may not have a copy, and it was also available online. And just come on up and help yourself. And as I go through this, please feel free to interrupt me and ask any questions you have. This year, I included some pictures in my presentation, some historical pictures of Wheeling. There's no hidden meaning in that. I just thought they were kind of neat, and so that's why I put them in there. So if you're wondering why they're there, that's why. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, every year we talk about the story, and this year I think the story is about maintaining core services and serving our residents and businesses, and also meeting our infrastructure needs. I'll speak more in detail about how we can accomplish all of those things, but I think those are the important goals to keep in mind for this year. As I go through the presentation, you're going to see some slides that you've seen in prior years, and the reason I put these things up here every year is because I think it's important from our residents' standpoint and our businesses' standpoint to understand how our budget works and what we're really talking about. So please don't take offense to the fact that you've seen this before, and just bear with me as I go through it. When we talk about what is the budget, I get this question a lot. It really depends on what you're talking about specifically. If you're talking about the overall budget, our total budget for 2013 is $63,600,000, and that can be one definition of what is the budget. But generally speaking, when people ask what is the budget, they're talking about the general fund. And so in order to talk specifically about that, you have to sort of set aside all of these other funds that are, for the most part, special revenue funds or special purpose funds. So, for instance, we take out of the equation the water and sewer fund, which is money that's set aside specifically for the operation of the water and sewer system and can't be spent on general operating expenses. And then we have funds for the TIF project funds. A lot of people ask questions about that because they see projects going on in our TIF districts and wonder why we're spending money on those projects. That money comes in and is specifically earmarked for economic development, and it cannot be used to pay for police salaries, fire, public works, administration, and so forth. We have money budgeted in our police and fire pension funds. Those are trust funds. That money is set aside specifically to pay the pensions of police officers and firefighters, and the village has no ability to access that money for any other purpose. We have money in our capital projects fund, which specifically comes from our utility tax. We have a tax on gas and electric use in Wheeling, and that money gets earmarked to the capital projects fund to pay for infrastructure costs. We have bond funds, debt service funds, and that money is raised specifically to pay for the principal and interest on our outstanding debt. We have a liability insurance fund that pays for claims related to general liability losses and workers' comp losses. The motor fuel tax fund is a tax. When you go to fill up your tank, you pay a tax on the gas that you purchase, and that money is earmarked specifically for mostly infrastructure, street projects, and so forth. We have a 911 fund, which is used, is money that comes from a tax on your telephone bill and your cell phone bill. That money can only be used for emergency 911 purposes, dispatching, and the like. This year we have a new fund, the Foreign Fire Insurance Tax Fund. We receive revenue each year from foreign fire insurance. It's policies that are sold in Illinois from companies that are outside Illinois. That money generates about $54,000 a year in revenue, and that is specifically allocated for the fire department to use for the benefit of the fire department. And then we have a grant fund. We have $150,000 budgeted for some grants that we are going to receive in 2013. Many of those are related to the police department, and they will talk about those later. And then finally, we have a SERF fund, Capital Equipment Replacement Fund, and that's money that we set aside each year for the eventual replacement of our vehicles and equipment, and we'll talk more about that as well. So all that being said, that gets us down to the general fund, which is $33.9 million for 2013, and the general fund pays for all of the operating costs of the village. As I mentioned before, mostly salaries and benefits, and the things that are necessary for the departments to operate on a day-to-day basis. As the village manager indicated before, when you look specifically at the general fund, most of the costs that are budgeted there are related to personnel, 77%, as this chart indicates. And then we have these other categories, which I've called discretionary and non-discretionary, which make up roughly 22%, the other 22 or 23% of the budget. And I want to talk about that a little bit in more detail. Again, we're starting with a general fund budget of $33.9 million, but I want to break that down a little further so that everyone understands where that money goes. And again, 77%, over $26 million, pays for salaries and overtime, pensions, and health insurance costs. That leaves another $5.5 million, or 16%, for things that I'm calling non-discretionary items. These are things that we really don't have a lot of control over. Things like workers' comp and general liability insurance premiums and claims. Again, SURF replacement costs, firefighting supplies, PC hardware and software, and the like. Those are things that are necessary for our departments to operate on a day-to-day basis. And then we have what I am describing as discretionary items, and that's $2.2 million, or 6.5% of the budget. And it's discretionary is, I put that in quotes for a reason, because these are things that technically you could cut out of the budget, but it's difficult to do so, and it has impacts when you do. For instance, with training and education, that is discretionary in the sense that we don't have to send our employees for training and education, and we could technically cut that out of the budget in cases where they don't need to go for certification purposes and so forth. But you do so, when you cut those things out, you do so and taking some risk. Our police officers and firefighters especially need to be trained, and I think our residents and businesses want them to be trained. So, and that goes for the finance department and admin and so forth, community development. You can cut those things, but then you take a risk in doing so. Conferences and meetings, economic development programs, these are all things that technically could be cut but do have an impact. So what the purpose of this slide is to show that although there is $33.9 million in expenditures, there's not a lot that can be cut without impacting core services and programs. Okay. This is another slide that you've seen before, and I put this up here every year just to show you how we compare from year to year in terms of our overall financial health. And this information in the left-hand column is as of 2011. There hasn't been really much change between 2011 and 2010. Just in general, we still have a AA bond rating from S&P and AAA from Fitch, which is excellent. We have, according to them, a moderate level of debt. So that's not just my words, that's the words of the bond rating agencies. And we still continue to have well-funded pension funds. Police and fire are at 72% and 66% respectively, and IMRF is at 72%. Certainly not where we'd like to be. We'd like to see that closer to about 90% and ideally 100%, but 90 would be the target. And then we have still very strong general fund reserves at $14.2 million, not much of a change from the prior year. That's 47% of our annual operating budget, well above our policy, which is 25%, and 25% is what the bond rating agencies typically look at as well. So we're still doing well financially in that sense, although we do have a deficit budget, obviously, that we have to deal with. So I want to talk about the estimated results in the general fund for 2012. And if you recall, when we were sitting here last year doing this same, having the same discussion, we ended up with a budgeted deficit in the general fund of $961,000. And for various reasons, which I'm going to discuss in a minute, it now looks like we're going to finish the year with a balanced budget, perhaps a slight surplus or a slight deficit, but right around balanced. And our ending fund balance will be about the same as a result. So the question is, why the difference? And also, I wanted to, when I put balanced up there, I needed to put an asterisk next to it to indicate that we got to balanced by using $1,300,000 of capital projects funds, $485,000 of SURF money, and $200,000 of liability insurance funds. And I guess that's an important point. Before I leave this slide, I just want to touch on that. The budget looks like it's going to be balanced at the end of 2012, but only because we borrowed from these other funds. So in actuality, we have a deficit because we're taking from these other funds to balance the budget.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
real quick, Michael? The $485 out of the SURF and the $200,000 liability insurance fund, Wasn't those items that were actually allocated to go into those funds?
Yes.
But this board decided not, so it's not monies actually that we took out, it's monies actually we didn't put in.
That's right.
Right.
Every year, we budget a transfer from the general fund to capital projects to pay for the general fund share of the eventual replacement of the equipment.
Right.
And the general fund share of the liability insurance claims and so forth.
So the
yeah,
real money that we actually took out was from the CIP.
That's right. It was reallocated from the CIP to the general fund.
Thank you.
Okay. So let me move on to the next slide. And so the question is, why are we going to end up with a balanced budget or close to a balanced budget? Well, our revenue was it looks like it's going to be about $216,000 more than we budgeted, which is a good thing. And our expenditures are going to be about $745,000 less than what we budgeted. I think our departments have done an excellent job over the last few years of really monitoring their budgets and trying to save money wherever they can, even buying things on eBay at times and so forth. So, this is a credit to them. Police and fire have really monitored their overtime and tried to reduce that wherever necessary. So that's the explanation for that. This slide gives you some history about the general fund for the last 5 years, including the proposed 2013 budget. And this is something that the village manager discussed in his opening remarks. And I really just want to focus on the last row here where it talks about the adjusted total. And this is 2009 through 2012, our actual results. 2012 is estimated. 2013 is the proposed budget less any transfers. So this is the bottom line budget, so to speak. And I just want you to take a look at 2013. We've got $32.1 million in expenditures budgeted, and compare that to 2009. Our budget for 2013, as presented to you today, is actually less than it was back in 2009, and that's remarkable for a lot of reasons. The only way that happens is if you make substantial cuts in your budget, mostly in personnel, and as you know, we've cut a number of positions out of the budget over the last few years. But this note that I have at the bottom is really what I want to focus on. If you take that $32.2 million back in 2009 and you assume 3% growth going forward every year, our budget would then be $4.1 million higher in 2013 than it was in 2009. That $4.1 million represents all of the things that have been cut out of the budget since that point. And that's not something I've ever seen before in my career. Those are substantial cuts. Our budget would be $4 million higher if we hadn't taken the steps as an organization that we did to reduce our expenditures. And again, this is a chart. It's the cuts that we've made in personnel have really impacted every department. And you've seen this chart before, but in general, we eliminated 15% of the positions in the organization since 2009. 38 total positions, including the water and sewer fund, which is what the manager referred to earlier. Okay. This is just a brief history of the results in the general fund going back to 2008. And back before 2008, we had happier times where we had much higher fund balances. We ran deficits in 2008, 2009, and 2010. 2011 was a surplus. You'll recall that we talked about that a few months ago. But again, that surplus was only because we took money from these other funds to get there. And in 2012, and then we moved back $1.5 million to those other funds at the end of, we decided to do that in 2012 a few months ago, so we've done that. In 2013, again, I'm estimating a balanced budget. And in 2012, I'm estimating a balanced budget. In 2013, I'm estimating a deficit of $3.6 million. And if that were to occur, if we were to do nothing to take action to reduce that deficit, then we would end up with a fund balance at the end of 2013 of $10.6 million. which represents 31% of operating expenditures and is still above our fund balance policy, but not by much. It's not a good trend, and we need to take action to correct this. And we'll talk about how to do that as well. This chart basically shows the actual results if we hadn't used money that is normally allocated to other funds in the general fund in these prior years. So here again is from the prior slide. Those were the audited results, but the second or third column rather shows the money that we used in each of those years to get to that point. So the actual result for the last several years has been a deficit. You know, even in 2011, we had a $1.5 million surplus, but the actual result was a $644,000 deficit, because had we not taken $2.2 million from these other funds, we would have had a deficit budget. In 2013, well, let me start with 2012. 2012, even if we're balanced, as I expect, that really represents a deficit of $1.9 million because of the borrowing from other funds. In 2013, we've presented to you a budget that doesn't reflect any borrowing from any other fund, and that's why the deficit is $3.6 million, because we haven't assumed that we're going to continue what we've done in the past to balance the budget. This just shows the same information graphically for the last few years. The blue line is our revenue and in the general fund, and our red line is expenditures. And obviously you can see there's a big gap between the two, and that's something that we need to begin to take steps to address. In the past, I've put some slides up here to show how Wheeling compares to other communities, because I think that a lot of people wonder about our budget and what we're spending our money on and whether we're doing things efficiently as an organization. And the only way to really get a perspective on that is to kind of compare ourselves to other nearby communities. So I have a few slides here. The first one shows our 2011 full-time employees per 1,000 residents. And as you'll see here, the average organization of the ones that I looked at have 6.81 employees per 1,000 residents. Wheeling's at 5.82, almost one fewer employee per 1,000, and really kind of in line with some of the other communities, or less than some of the other communities that we compared ourselves to. So I think this is one measure of efficiency of the organization. Another one is how much money do we spend per capita? And, you know, most of these communities, with a few exceptions here or there, are providing the same essential core services. There's some differences. You know, some towns like Niles have a bus system. We don't have that, and so forth. But the point is that in general, you're providing police, fire, public works, and so forth. The average community is spending $930 per person to provide those services. Wheeling's doing it for $746 per person, which is lower than any other community on this chart. And then I wanted to look at property tax revenue per capita. How much are these communities raising in property tax? And the average, again, is $328 per person. We're at $287, which is one of the lowest of the communities that we surveyed. Now, I always point this out every year. Niles is kind of an outlier, because if you look at my note at the bottom, they collect $21.8 million in sales tax each year. When you collect that kind of sales tax, you can afford to have a very low property tax levy. Just as a point of comparison, Wheeling collects about $8.5 million in sales tax every year. If we had $21.8 million in sales tax coming in every year, we wouldn't need a property tax levy. So I just wanted to put that in perspective. And then this slide combines sales and property tax on a per capita basis. And it shows you that the average of these communities is $650. Wheeling is at the low end at $502 per capita. So again, I think this illustrates the point that we really are doing more with less compared to our other communities. Again, what's included in the 2013 budget is funding for core services. And that's all of the things that I mentioned before. Some of the highlights of what's in this budget. In the Capital Projects Fund, we've budgeted $1.2 million for the Dundee Road bicycle pedestrian path. Most of that is funded by a grant, and that will be discussed by some of the departments later. We have $1.8 million in street improvement projects, and while that sounds like a lot, it's really not enough. We have a significant infrastructure needs in our community, and we really would like to see more money being devoted to those street improvement projects. We have money for other things like the SCADA upgrade, water main replacement program, and the elevated tank recoating and repair program. This year, the village manager, there were a number of expanded level requests that were submitted by the departments, and for those that aren't familiar with how our budget process works, anything that's new and different from prior years, departments have to ask for as an expanded level request. It's something that's not been in the budget in the past. And the manager approved the following items, subject to your approval. We've had to allocate $210,000 for the Emerald Ash Borer Tree Program, something we'll talk about more, I'm sure, later. He approved $25,000 for an economic development website upgrade and $30,000 for an economic development advertising program, which will come out of the TIF funds. And then there's some other things from the police department, a projector and a screen, and a change in personnel, upgrading a corporal position to a sergeant position, which we'll all talk about later and certainly answer your questions if you have them. We've also included, again this year, the full contribution from the general fund to the SURF fund. And I wanted to just talk about, for the people here who aren't familiar with our capital equipment replacement fund, what that's about. It was created in 1990. And really all it is, it's very simple. It's just a financing tool that allows us to set aside funds for the eventual replacement of our equipment. Mostly vehicles, trucks, and squad cars and that type of thing. And what it does, and many communities have a SURF fund or some version of it. By doing that, you can eliminate large fluctuations in the budget from year to year. And the tax levy as well. The example we always use is the fire truck, because that's probably the most expensive piece of equipment we own. But a ladder truck might cost $1 million to replace. If we haven't been setting aside money every year on a systematic basis to replace that, then there's going to come a point where it has to be replaced, and we're going to have to come up with $1 million in that particular year to fund that. Just to put that in perspective, $1 million equates to a 10% increase in the tax levy. So in order to avoid that type of situation where we have to increase our tax levy or make major cuts in other programs to pay for our normal operating equipment, we set up this SURF fund years ago, and we set aside money every year to fund it. It also reduces the need for financing the equipment. So there's no need to sell bonds to pay for vehicles and trucks and things like that. Now the anticipated, actually that should say at 2012, the anticipated fund balance at the end of 2012 is about $4.3 million, even though we haven't been making the full contributions the last few years. And if we were to decide not to fund SURF anymore and just use what's in the existing fund to pay for equipment, we would run out of SURF money in about 5 years. Okay, I wanted to talk about some of the things that are not available to the general fund in 2013 and are creating more pressure and leading to a larger deficit than we've seen in the past. And it's really these 5 things. We have to make a $150,000 contribution to the 911 fund to pay for dispatching costs, because the money that we receive from the cell phone bills and the telephone bills and so forth is not sufficient to cover those costs. We have $150,000 budgeted this year for related to a sales tax sharing agreement that we have with Prospect Heights. That's new this year. That's an estimate. It may be a little bit more, it may be a little bit less, but that's based on what I've seen, that's what I think it's going to cost us on an annual basis. We have $54,000 that used to be in the general fund that's now allocated to the foreign fire insurance tax fund, and that's per state statute. That's not something that we can really control, but that money is no longer available to the general fund. And we had been receiving significant money from a federal grant for firefighters that's running out in 2012. So now the general fund has to assume the costs of those positions. So in total, that's $610,000 of money that's really been taken away from the general fund for various purposes. Overtime is always something that people pay attention to, and rightfully so. And I just wanted to show graphically how we've done since 2008. Again, our 2013 budget has $1,007,000 in overtime. That's less than what we actually spent back in 2008. Excuse me. And I have the same type of note that I had on the other slide. If you assume even just 2% growth from 2008 to 2013, we would be budgeting an additional $228,000 this year. So that $228,000 represents the cuts that have been made to overtime over the last several years. There's things that are not included in the budget that I just want to highlight. Again, I mentioned before major street improvement projects. We have $1.7 million in MFT funds related to street projects, but it's clearly not enough. We should be putting more money into our streets. We don't have any new personnel. Freedom Fest is not in the budget. Fireworks are not in the budget, and there are no employee recognition events. This has been the case for the last few years, so that probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. I just want to highlight briefly the water and sewer fund. The budget includes a 4.6% increase in water and sewer rates. We've been increasing our rates every year for several years, and the water and sewer fund is well funded. That money is necessary to pay for the ongoing maintenance of the system, water main improvement and replacement programs, and so forth. If approved, that increase would cost the average resident who uses 7,000 gallons per month an additional $24 roughly next year. Mentioned this before. And then the last point is that, as you all know, we're implementing a new water meter program, and those water meters are going to be more accurate than the meters that are in place right now. So we do expect that our revenue will increase because more of the water will actually be read than has been in the past. And this just briefly shows our water sales by year going back to 2005. We used to sell a lot more water. Obviously, this is a downward trend, although it's leveled off in the last few years. There's a lot of reasons for this. People are using more highly efficient appliances, toilets, shower heads, and so forth. As a result of the economy, we've had foreclosures in town, businesses that have gone out of business, and obviously they're not using water anymore. But it looks like we're finally getting to a place of stability with our water sales. Okay, I want to talk about the property tax levy, which I really believe is the most important thing that we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of other important things to discuss, but But as I said, we are facing a $3.6 million deficit next year after several years of deficit budget. We have cut expenditures substantially. As you saw before, our 2013 budget, proposed budget, is less than our 2009 approved budget. And many of our, well, all of our major sources of revenue are less than they were in 2007. And that has, all of those factors more than anything else have contributed to our projected deficit. The village manager discussed the new normal earlier, and I think this slide demonstrates that concept better than probably any other slide I could put up here. I just want to look at this chart and indicate to you that there are, as the manager did, that there are three major sources of revenue to the general fund: property tax, sales tax, and income tax. And those account for nearly 60% of the general fund revenue. You can see in this column what we collected in 2007, and you can see in this column what we're projecting to collect in 2013. And the bottom line is that we are expecting to have $2.6 million less in revenue in 2013 to work with than we did in 2007. You'll recall that we started this process of using capital projects fund money and SURF fund money and so forth, liability insurance fund money, to balance the budget a few years ago. And the reason we did that is because we felt that the downturn in the economy, at least we hoped that the downturn in the economy was going to be a short-term event. Now that we're talking about 2013, it now appears that that's not the case. These numbers that we saw in 2007, especially with respect to sales tax, are not numbers that we're going to get back to anytime soon. So when we talk about the new normal, that's what we're talking about. We're having to work with significantly less revenue than we did in the past. And that's led to these deficit budgets. Let me just go back one. The stool there, I put that stool there for a reason, because it's the three-legged stool. The three legs are income tax, sales tax, and property tax. And when sales tax and income tax are down, the only thing that can make up for it is property tax, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. That's my first bullet point here. The property tax levy is the only source of revenue that the board has control over. And it's the only source of revenue that can produce enough new revenue each year to offset our increasing costs. As Manager Svandilis indicated before, our personnel costs go up every year by $800,000 to $900,000, and that's doing nothing different. That's not any new staff. That's just existing staff providing core services. And then you have contractual services and commodities and so forth, and they increase as well. And so the third bullet point is that the village, and this is not unusual for Wheeling, it's true of any community, must bring in new revenue every year to offset those rising costs. We put a lot of time and effort and money into economic development, and that's a very important thing and something we should continue to do. But just to put this in perspective, you would need 8 new restaurants on Restaurant Row every year just to offset the normal increase in costs that we experience on an annual basis. I put Serenello's and D'Agostino's and Twin Peaks up there as examples, but it's not realistic to think that economic development alone can solve this problem. It's certainly an important aspect of what we do. It's something that we have to emphasize, but absent a brand new mall like a Golf Mill or an Old Orchard or something like that, that's not going to be the only solution to this problem. we're continuing to provide core services, and we've talked about in the past what our core services are. And we can certainly have that conversation again. But in the past, this organization has decided that these areas of need are core services. So we have a recommendation with respect to the tax levy, and I want to go through that. We've spent a lot of time talking about this at a staff level, and what we're recommending is that the village implement a multi-year tax levy plan that will get us to a point where we can balance the general fund budget and also fund our infrastructure needs. We've been not funding our infrastructure needs to the extent that we need to, and we need to get back to the point where the general fund is not relying on other funds to balance the budget. So we're proposing to increase the tax levy by 7.5% per year for the next 5 years, and then reevaluate that after 3 years in order to do those things that I mentioned. And I think that you can argue that small incremental increases in the tax levy is something that the residents and businesses can absorb a little easier than large fluctuations from year to year. This chart you've seen many times before. Excuse me. This shows our history for essentially the last 30 years in terms of tax levy increases. And you go back to the early 80s, and that's scary to me. As a finance director, I wouldn't want to present that levy increase of 45%. So my goal has always been to flatten this line. I want to avoid the situation where we have large fluctuations from year to year. And I put this note up here that since 1983, the average annual tax levy increase is 4.82%. So despite all the highs and the lows, over time we would still have realized a 4.82% increase per year. And that, and that's even in much better economic times than we're experiencing now. Our tax levy was still going up during the 90s when we were experiencing much greater sales tax revenue and income tax revenue and so forth than we are today, and even in the early 2000s as well. So that's always been the goal, is to get to a level point of increase. The question that that I get a lot, and the residents I think have a lot, is why do property taxes have to go up every year? And I think this slide illustrates the challenges that we deal with more so than anything else. Here's our estimated expenditures in 4 major categories for the general fund for 2012: wages, health insurance, pension benefits, and then what I'm calling everything else, which is your commodities and your contractual services and so forth. In 2013, if you assume a 2.25% increase in wages, which is what has been the case for the last few years, you need $397,000 in new revenue just to cover that. If health insurance is going up 8%, which is actually what our trend has been for the last several years, you need another $305,000. If pension benefits go up 4%, which I actually think is low, next year they're projected to go up 8%, you would need $170,000. And if everything else, the commodities, contractual services, so forth, go up just 2%, that equates to $157,000 in new revenue. This gets at the point that the village manager was talking about before. A 3.07% growth rate equates to $1,029,000 of new revenue that we have to come up with every year. And that's, again, doing nothing different than what we've done in the past. So I broke this down a little bit further. Let's keep this number in mind, $1,029,000, and let's look again at our major sources of revenue. Sales tax I have projected to increase by 4.45% next year. Part of that is because we have some new restaurants that are opening now or are going to open soon, and I've factored that into the equation. The actual increase for our existing sales tax base is just over 3%. But at 4.45%, that generates another $371,000 in revenue. Income tax is actually projected to go down. We get our income tax estimates from the Illinois Municipal League. They've looked at this and they believe that we will receive less next year than we are receiving this year. And then if you just anticipate a 2% increase in all our other sources of revenue, which include things like the telecommunications tax, the food and beverage tax, cable TV franchise fees, and so forth, that produces $247,000 in new revenue. To get to $1,029,000, we would then, the only thing that we can control and increase would be the tax levy, and we would have to increase the overall tax levy, not just the portion that's going to the general fund, but the overall tax levy by 4.71% just to plug the gap and get us to $1,029,000. And this goes to the point that I was trying to make earlier, which is that there is pressure on the tax levy every year to make up this difference in bad economic times. Now, the economy is turning around, and that's good. And to the extent that it gets better, there's less pressure on the tax levy. But where we're at now, there's a need to increase the tax levy. That 4.71%, by the way, just breaks even. It doesn't do anything to address the deficit situation, to reduce the deficit. So that's why we're recommending more than 4.71%, because not only do we have to address our $1 million in normal increases, but we also have to allocate money to reduce the deficit and get us back to a balanced budget. This shows what the impact of various tax levy increases would be on the residents in Wheeling. And obviously, if your tax bill is $10,000, then you can just double these amounts. But it gives you kind of an idea of what the impact would be. And these numbers are before income tax deductions. So for those people who are able to write off their property taxes and their mortgage interest, you know, the impact of this is less than the numbers that I've put up there, depending on what tax bracket you're in and so forth. And then I have the same chart up here for some businesses in town, and I just use it as an example, Rise and Dine and Bob Chin's and Pactiv, and what the impact would be to them, again, before any income tax deductions of increases in the tax levy at various points. And this is based on their actual taxes that they paid in 2012. I put this up there every year just so the public understands that most of your property tax bill goes to other taxing districts. 10.5% goes to the Village of Wheeling. And you have to keep in mind that, you know, I personally believe that we're the best deal in town. You know, for 10.5% of your property tax bill, you're getting all of these services that I indicated on the left here. You know, obviously police, fire, EMS, streets, snow plowing, forestry, human services, all of those types of things. But the vast majority of the tax bill goes to the school districts and other taxing districts. I'm almost done here, so bear with me. I just wanted to highlight, it's one thing for me to stand up here and tell you, you know, that we're doing well in terms of our overall financial situation and so forth. But I like to put comments up here from the bond rating agencies, and because we just recently, back in August, had we refunded some bonds to realize savings, and we had to have a bond rating update. So they made a few comments when they issued their report, and what they had to say about the Village of Wheeling is that you know, they focused on our fund balance. At entering fiscal year 2012, it was at 52% of spending. That's a great thing that they focused on. They said that our debt profile is moderate and manageable. And then they said that our finances are marked by the village's good revenue control and diversity, high fund balances, conservative budgeting, and multi-year planning. And Fitch ratings also indicated that although we had a fund balance draw, or expected one in 2011, we added $1.6 million to fund balance, again, due to conservative budgeting as sales tax and good cost controls, especially in the use of overtime. They noticed that. And that our pension plans are still satisfactorily funded between 70 and 80%, closer to 70. And that the village continues to make the actuarially determined annual pension contribution to its 3 pension funds. That's something that the bond rating agencies look at. Standard & Poor's had similar things to say. Again, the village made contributions equal to or in excess of the annual required contributions to its pension funds. They did note that partially offsetting the strengths that we have was their concern about our reliance on economically sensitive tax revenues to support our operations. And what they're talking about there is sales tax and income tax. To the extent that you are bringing in more property tax revenue and relying less on sales tax and income tax, you're in a much stronger financial position. So that was a concern for them. And that's all I have. I know that took a long time, and I apologize, but I think these issues are important to talk about. For today's budget workshop, we would like to talk to the board about our options for reducing the deficit. Certainly go through the department budget requests and answer any questions you have about that, and then again talk about the property tax levy. So are there any questions that you have for me at this time?
Madam President, if it pleases you, I think it makes sense to roll right into the options for reducing the deficit. I think that's a conversation that's best had immediately following some of the technical details that Director Monchain has given, which is coincidentally the next slide.
Yeah.
If that pleases the board.
I see we had no questions right away, so.
Well,
But Trustee Hine had his hand up, and Trustee Agiris. Nothing? Okay. Trustee Agiris.
since we just talked about the tax levy, let's get educated again on the tax levy. Today, the Village of Wheeling, actually for the last couple of years, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm trying to gather all this, has collected in real estate taxes approximately $10.6 million a year.
Correct.
Without any increase in the tax levy, basically in the last couple of years.
There was no increase.
Right, zero increase.
Right.
Let me ask you this, with new development coming in, or properties going back on the tax rolls again, the total amount of taxes that are collected within our community itself more than likely exceeds that $10.6 million that we request from the county every single year. Is that correct?
Yes, the county collects the taxes for all of the taxing districts.
That's correct. But what I'm saying is this, is something new goes on the tax rolls. Mm-hmm. Properties that, across the street, for instance, eventually gets developed and creates a real estate tax. It creates an increment. Mm-hmm. If we don't increase the levy, are we getting our share of that new development in revenue? Are we getting it unless we ask? Do we get it, or do we have to ask for it?
It's a great question, and I appreciate you bringing it up. No, the answer is no. We don't get it unless we increase our tax levy. You know, as you mentioned, we levied last year $10.6 million. And generally speaking, we will collect $10.6 million, maybe a little bit less, a little bit more, but right around there. If you have a situation that you're referring to where you have new growth in the community, for example, you have a new business that locates in Wheeling, and they're generating $500,000 a year or paying $500,000 a year in property tax, The only way that you collect that is by increasing your levy by a similar number.
You're recapturing it.
Yeah. You have to do that. Otherwise, you're going to get 10.6 million. Now, the beauty of economic development and why Peter is one of my best friends in this
Mine too.
organization is that when that increase in growth occurs, you can capture that without having really any impact on the existing homeowners and businesses.
But that's getting to my point. Because I think the perception out there to everybody is, I have a $9,000 real estate tax bill. And the Village of Wheeling, based on your recommendation, is asking for a 7.5% increase, a levy increase of my taxes. And it's always perceived out there that I'm going to pay 7.5% more on top of the $9,000 I'm already paying. It's really not the case every time.
It's not. You're right.
It's not.
And it depends. Now, it has been, to be fair, it has been in the last few years because we've been in a situation where the EAV for the community, not unlike any other community,
down.
has dropped.
Yeah.
So there's been no new growth, okay? But in an era when there is growth, that like we saw prior to 2008, we could approve a 7.5% increase, and you might not see the effects of that at all.
Well, in some
because of
cases
that new
last year,
growth.
Michael, my taxes went up dramatically, and others within the community went down dramatically.
Right.
How that works is...
And well, that
God
has to
knows.
do oftentimes with the shifting of tax burden and
Right.
so forth. But to your point, I remember, Trustee Argyris, several years ago, there was I don't remember which year, but there was a year that we increased the tax levy by whatever percentage. And I remember you commenting on the fact that you had gotten your tax bill and it either stayed the same or it went down.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that happens is because if you have a big jump in your EAV, it spreads the tax burden among all the taxpayers.
Everybody, right.
And so a 7.5% increase or 5% or whatever it may be may not actually be realized because of that new growth.
And and that to me has always been the burden on core services. Because you are bringing in new development. In the last couple of years, and you and I have talked about this, and I hate raising taxes or levies, and nobody likes it. It's never a favorable thing. But there's a lot of dollars that are being left on the table here with this village being dependent on to supply those core services to these new developments, whether it be residential, commercial, industrial, whatever the case may be. Your example of 7.5% with a 5-year plan over the next 5 years is actually an increase of income of $4.6 million. Because remember, it's 7.5% compounded.
Compounded, right.
You're at 10.6 last year, going to 11.4 next year, compounded to 12.2, and so on and so on. That's a lot of dollars on the table that somebody else is getting, we're not. So I think we really got to educate and get to a point where how much more do we do this and try to keep expenses in check and keep personnel and core services here? Because we're losing the battle here. The good part is, in my opinion, you gave examples of Niles. I'll give you a better example. Look what happened to Schaumburg.
Right.
These communities are relying too much on sales tax revenue. And in a down economy, and we faced it on a smaller scale, they didn't have the other two parts of the stool, the legs,
Right.
to rely on.
That's right.
And today, those communities, as big as they are, as wealthy as some assume they are, they're hurting. And they're finding now that, the free ride of not collecting real estate taxes isn't working anymore, and they're going to start adding legs to those chairs. But I think we really got to look at, and I hate to use different things like that, but there's something wrong here. We can't survive based on that. But Michael, one thing does bother me. You make reference to restaurants based on your projection of almost $400,000 increase in sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
Are we factoring in the addition of the Walmarts, the full year of the Fresh Farm Center regarding sales tax that are coming in there?
I do. I look at all of those things.
Okay, I mean, you make no mention of it, and I was wondering,
Yeah.
is there a magic number that you're projecting for next year based on those huge retail
I came
spots?
up with a 4.4% projected increase in sales tax.
Across the board?
Across the board, taking into consideration our existing sales tax base, our existing businesses, and some of the new things that you're talking about.
Okay.
So, it's not an exact science. I try to project what those numbers
Sure.
are going to be, but that's my best guess.
If I may interject, Michael, as a general comment, just so that everybody understands, when we talk about a new restaurant on Restaurant Row, the monies that we'll receive, it's about equivalent to $100,000 a year,
roughly.
which is also equal to about 1% increase in the tax levy. So when we look at debt in these large numbers and we look at revenue in much smaller numbers, it's easy for us to say, okay, if we need to raise $1 million, we need either a 10% tax levy increase or 10 new restaurants. Because one new restaurant equals $100,000, 1% tax levy increase equals $100,000. Right.
No, that was the point I was trying to make, is not to downplay the importance of economic development, because it's very important. But, you know, to John's point, it would take, you know, that $1,029,000 that we're going up every year, just doing the same thing that we did yet before, it would take 8 or 9 restaurants to offset that
Right,
cost.
right. I have other stuff, but I just wanted to touch base on the tax levy. I'm fine for right now.
That's fine, you're fine for now?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions of Mr. Monashane, or did you want to continue on and we'll overview the police and the fire and go forward? Is that what you would like to, or would you like to discuss that 7.5%?
I think I'd like to see the departmentals first. I'd like to go through the departmentals as my choice first.
Well, that's what we wanna make sure, so that everybody's in agreement. I think we could take a 10-minute break right now.
Perfect.
And when we come back, we'll start with the police.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Do we need to adjourn? We don't need to adjourn?
No, okay, we're just taking a break.
No, thanks. Don't drink that stuff.
We will now resume our budget hearings,
Coffee pot.
and we will begin with, and if there are any particular questions for the police department, or additions, or anything that you have to say concerning the police department. Chief, would you like to give a short overview on police department?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I promised it's a very short slide presentation that we'll go through quickly and then be available for any questions that you may have. And we'll start with general responsibilities of the police department. We're a 24/7 full-service police department divided into 3 divisions: patrol, investigations, and support services. We're responsible for enforcement of laws, traffic laws, criminal law. We've spent a lot of time with public education. We're just completed a CALEA on-site accreditation cycle, and we're responsible for, along with the fire department, the 911 emergency fund. It's the same slide as last year. We have not increased personnel, 84 full-time, and really 2 part-time plus 8 crossing guards. And if you look at, since 2003, our numbers have been as high as 96 and have been for the last 3 to 4 years at 84, which is a little deception from 2010 because 2 of those personnel were a shift in the police department having the social workers under our budget and it being shifted to human services department. If you'll see, our proposed budget before you is for $12,401,827. Of that, 90.23% is personnel. The rest of in general, the rest of the contract is for maintenance contracts, operational supplies, gun range related equipment, and vehicle maintenance and fuel. Our 911 budget is at $507,756. And some of the big ticket items are the Code Red, the Tri-Tech, our 911 physical equipment, and general radio maintenance and repair. Sure.
Can I interrupt for just a second? As you saw on that last slide in the police department, personnel makes up about 90% of their individual department budget. When we talked in aggregate about the general fund as a whole, we were at approximately 80%. You'll see as we go through these department budgets that depending on the responsibilities and therefore the cost of providing the service, that number changes with each department. So I think it's important to notice that although in aggregate 80% of our total budget is dedicated to personnel, in some departments like police, we're talking about 90% going directly to personnel services, and as you can see, the remaining items make up then, in this case, the additional 10%. So I just wanted to point that out, that each department will have a different percentage for personnel that I think further makes the point about how we structure our budgets.
Thank you. We were asked to put up our performance measures, the efficiency and effective measures. And the 3 that we presented are compliance with CALEA standards. Our target was to be greater than 80%. We were actually at 94.7%. Our response time, which is very important, our goal is under 3 minutes. Last year we came in at 1.9 minutes. And our total crimes per 1,000 residents, the target increased clearance rate last year was 81.65%. It's pretty high compared to other law enforcement agencies in the northwest suburbs. Our output measures, clearance rate in Part 1 crimes, which are the more serious crimes, the forcible felonies, we had a 13% increase in clearance rates on our Part 1 crimes, which is significant. Cash seized was $26,000, just short of $500, and our admin toll fees was $252,000. If you look at our calls for service going back 4 years, you'll see that they remain relatively consistent, a slight increase we're projecting this year. But pretty much we've remained consistent with the Part 1 and Part 2 crimes and the breakdown of the calls for service. And if you want to see some of the fees collected, there should be in your information. Red light cameras, 165. Administrative tolls are at 191. Parking tickets, 67,000. DUI fees, 19,000. And what village manager's Fondos alluded to before, we've taken in we project $12,510, totaling $456,000 for 2012.
Chief, I'm going to interrupt again. I apologize, and my apologies to the board. I should have gone through this a little bit before we started the individual department presentations. Beginning last year, really for the first full year, we instituted performance measures as part of each department's budget, which allows the public and the board to see exactly how we're accountable for the way we provide services. So the last slides that the chief went over are specific to the police department, but as you see these individual department presentations, you'll notice that there's a form, and I asked that each department put together some of the major categories that are important for everyone to hear. One of them, performance measures. The next one is what else are we doing? How else are we bringing in revenue in each department? So in particular, the police department, as you see, is nearly $500,000 of other fees collected. I thought it was significant to talk about, what do we do to bring in money while we are, and I keep repeating it, a service agency. There are opportunities to bring in money. They don't nearly offset the cost, but what are we doing to bring in additional money? So each department will go through some of their, in this case, fees collected for the police department. You're going to see that format followed throughout all of these presentations. I apologize that I didn't say that before the chief began.
Thank you. In addition to the fees collected, we've taken in almost $32,000 in grant funding for the grants before you. And I put a note on the bottom that there's been a significant decrease in grants available since 2010, and that's due to state and federal grants drying up as it relates to law enforcement and enforcement programs in general. And that's our last slide, and I'm available for any questions.
If I may, I don't have a question. My statement, I'm happy to see that, and I hope it agrees with the board, the patrol sergeant, but I would like to see at least one new police officer added to the police department. Because I think going way back, years back, we were looking at adding more police, but then we could not do that. And I know times are bad, but I think that we need to, and I'd like to see another increase in a new patrol officer so that we will have more efficiency than we do right now. So that is only one comment. I'm asking the board how they feel. And Trustee Trustee Lang put his hand up, and then Trustee Brady and Trustee Vogel. If I may, Trustee Lang.
Thank you. One of the pink slips that you have in here is for the scales. And if you can go into a little detail on that, and then I have some questions regarding that.
Overweight truck enforcement, if we purchase the scale, there's fines and fees that come with it that if you see in a justification, I think it will certainly offset it in a relatively short period of time. But I think equally or even more importantly, I think the overweight trucks, the burden that it causes to the village, the state, and the county with the damage to the roads, it's like the administrative toll funds. That's the arresting of people violating the law causes a burden on the police department and the finances of the police department, and we feel that it's fair that they should share some of those costs. And the presenting this overweight truck enforcement program and purchasing a portable scale, I think, is a benefit, and it's a win-win for the village, the state, and the county.
Can I add why I said no to that? And Chief Benson, perhaps it would make sense then to talk about would an officer need to be dedicated to do that, and therefore removing, we only have, and I don't want to speak for you, 6 officers on the street at any given time?
6 minimum.
6 minimum. The thought for me was obviously there's a source of revenue that's a potential here, but it's because we only have 6 officers in the street to dedicate one of them to be doing truck enforcement without adding an officer in order to cover some of, not just this, but the traffic responsibilities in general would be irresponsible. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
We do have a few truck enforcement trained officers. If we get this scale, we would like to train some more as an adjunct function of a patrol duty. And currently, it's not that we don't have the ability to do truck enforcement, but it is, as the village manager alluded to, it's very time intensive. We have to depend on one of our freight yards in town if they have the availability of the scale. Oftentimes, we don't have 24-hour availability, and it does tie an officer up for a substantial amount of time having to take somebody from, for instance, Milwaukee and Lake Cook down off of Shattuck and be at the mercy of the freight yards. I will say they have been very cooperative, but they have limited resources to offer us. But just to be very clear with it, it's not that we couldn't do it, which is another reason that we wanted to put this on and expand it so you'd fully understand, it's a big ticket expenditure, but I don't want to mislead you that we couldn't do it if we didn't have this. I think our ability, with the increased ability, would take a lot more overweight trucks off the city, state, and local roads.
Well, and I agree with that. This isn't a project or something that you do every day. This is something that you target once a week, every 2 weeks. You wouldn't put scales out every single day because that would also be a burden on traffic coming through the village. So it wouldn't be, you wouldn't really need to dedicate someone every day to this.
We have a traffic enforcement unit that they would be the primary overweight truck enforcement personnel. To say every day, I think if they, like anything else, if you see an obvious violation, and I've never been trained in overweight enforcement, but the people who are, like the state police, they know it more when they see it. And I would hope to think that even if they weren't out for truck enforcement, if they saw something that was an obvious violation, that regardless if that was their purpose that day or not, that they would stop that truck and get that portable scale out there to get that overweight truck off the road. So I don't know if that answers your question. Would it be a full-time function of a traffic officer? Absolutely not. We don't have the resources to do that. But we would do it as much as we could in the spirit of taking overweight trucks off the road as much as the revenue that it would bring in, or more.
My point is, if we had these scales, you wouldn't be setting them up every day.
They're portable, so they could be in a car every day.
But you wouldn't have a roadblock, for instance, and
No, sir.
say, not every day. You
No.
do that on occasion.
On
I've
occasion.
seen it on occasion throughout, on Lake Cook Road, in Deer Park area, for instance, along the bridge. Areas where you don't want heavy trucks crossing something like a bridge, which would be, if it got damaged, it would be very detrimental and expensive.
Exactly. In the same vein as a DUI checkpoint, we would periodically set up a dedicated day, an area that, like you said, bridges or routes that would be common for overweight trucks to think that they can get through without being detected.
So my point for this is I think it's good, especially, you said keywords, it'll pay for itself shortly. Your target isn't wheeling trucks or wheeling businesses. There's a lot of trucks that come through our village from other areas that are causing a lot of damage to our roads. Those, I'm assuming, are some of your targets as
Yes.
well. Okay. And we could, I think our businesses would know that we're checking, so they would probably be a little bit more in check to not send trucks out that are too heavy.
I would hope so, and if this is approved, we certainly wouldn't keep it a secret. We would make it clear the intent of it, and hopefully there would be voluntary compliance. And again, it's like the DUI funds. You want to see DUIs going down because you hope to know that people are getting the message and not violating the law and driving drunk. I think it would be a win, if nothing else, if we had fewer trucks overweight damaging our roads. But based on the research that's done, I'm sure that there's still going to be people from out of state, out of this area coming through with overweight trucks that we would have the ability to enforce on site.
And lastly, we could possibly share this with a neighboring village if they were in agreement as well, if they saw a need to this as well, a Northbrook or a Buffalo Grove or something like that. Would it be possible to share? Because, as you said, you don't use the equipment every day.
Absolutely. In joint enforcement programs, we certainly would look into. I know Buffalo Grove is very active with their overweight truck enforcement program. Sure.
Okay. Well, this is one that I'd like to see added, if everyone else agrees. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Trustee Brady?
Thank you. Just to expand on that a little bit more, with overweight trucks, they're
Do you get all the revenue, does the village get all the revenue from the fines that are associated with being overweight?
We are not allowed to bring it into an adjudication hearing, if that's your question. So to answer your question, the same portion of any fine that would go to the county would still be in effect. In essence, if there was a $5,000 fine and based on the amount of weight a truck was over, we wouldn't get $5,000. We would get $5,000 minus court fees. And that's out of our control. That's state law. We can't overwrite that. Our home rule authority doesn't allow us to bring this. It's specifically spelled out in law that this is not something that would be available for the adjudication hearing process.
And I know some of the fines can get very, very hefty on.
They're based on the amount of weight over.
Very hefty.
Weight over.
Matter of fact, some guys just give the truck and walk away from it. They're so severe. That brings me to a similar thing. Obviously, I see where you're pretty much at your minimum as far as personnel and everything else, and I don't know where we can cut from your department, but if there's a way we can increase revenue would be the way to answer this problem. And I'm wondering, is there anything that we're not adjudicating here that we can, to bring, instead of sharing with the county or sharing with the state, whatever it is, that we can bring here and keep the funds that we collect on it? I don't know what the different classifications of violations there could be. What about DUIs?
We cannot. Cannot.
So
everything we can do, we are doing. It's limited by law.
Really? Okay, so there's nothing more we can do in the way of prosecuting anything here that might bring us in more revenue?
No, it's more convenient for us, and certainly it's more financially beneficial to us, but we are bound by the law.
And then, one last thing, on the scale that we're talking about, we're not a very big community area-wise, and it wouldn't be that much of a problem to bring a truck to the police department to be weighed. And is a portable unit better, or would it be cheaper, more efficient to set up a unit behind the police station here that could weigh a truck? This way, anybody could make the stop and bring him here.
The traffic unit, it's funny you say that, because they've already mentioned to me maybe it would be more beneficial, and I don't want to drop a surprise on them, and not that it would happen either at the police station or Public Works, but it may be more beneficial to have it already set up, because it's big, heavy, and bulky, and then to bring, we know we'd have 100% availability when it was set up. That's one of the options that we would consider. But I like the fact that it's portable and that we would have that option. And when we did design, if you notice the design of the impound lot, the future impound lot behind our police station, the old impound lot was more squared off. We purposely designed it so we can, if we needed to seize a truck for a semi-truck, we didn't have that ability before because we couldn't turn it around. Now we put the gates on both sides, and that would be a natural place to put it, or possibly Public Works, because it's a center town. A lot more trucking goes on through Hintz Road. But those are all just options. We haven't made what we would like is to get it and to start the program and to see what's in the best interest as far as logistics and manpower, and then make a decision. But buying a portable one gives us those options.
How many overweight stops do you make a year now, approximately?
Jen?
Well, out of the traffic unit, depending upon what their deployment is, due to some manpower issues, we usually would probably say that on the trucking level, maybe 10% of their time is spent on trucks, just because of the support that they provide to our patrol shifts. Also, in the description there, you'll see that it talks about 2 officers involved in that, and it is definitely a 2-officer procedure. What we have found is utilizing our day shift officers at slower times in the morning, or like was brought up with Trustee Lang, utilizing outside agencies, where you would get state police likes to be involved with villages to run these types of operations, so utilizing their personnel is also favorable to us, so we don't have to pull from the shift. We don't like to bring 2 traffic officers out there because we like to run a traffic officer on days and afternoons. Trucks usually are moving at the greatest amount of time is during the daytime hours.
You need 2 people because of the setting up this portable unit, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, with a portable unit as well as with the stationary too.
So it wouldn't be a bad idea if you set up a portable, permanent unit, more of a permanent unit, or set up the portable unit. Public Works are here, so one person, one officer could bring that truck in, weigh it, and
You still have to have somebody, guiding and looking at the, what the scale certification, what is showing on there. It really is a two-officer operation. To put one officer in that situation when you're moving the truck through there, it would create a hazard.
I've seen them out in the highways, the state police.
Oh, they're out
Guy
there.
right out, one guy, right out in the highway, so, okay, anyways, I'm a little undecided on this here. I think if there's that much of a need for it, we should do it, but I'm not really for it right this year because of the fact that we're still running a deficit, so I'd say no right now.
Thank you. Trustee Vogel was next. Thank you.
First, Chief, I'd like to thank you for your visibility in the community. I've seen you guys out at the bike rodeos, the Rockin' with the Cops at the schools, your child restraint system assistance with the residents, and I've heard a lot of comments from residents also that they've seen you and your staff at schools, various functions, and I think that's important, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Secondly, the call center. I know when we redid and remodeled the building over there, we built up the call center, but looking at the numbers, and maybe somebody can correct me, I may need Chief McIsaac to correct me on this one if I'm wrong, but our payment to the Red Center for the fire calls is $290,000 a year?
Yes.
If we transferred our service for the police department, how would that be charged? Is it a flat fee per municipality? Is it a fee for population? Or isn't it that easy to define?
Well, first of all, Red Center does not accept law enforcement dispatching.
Okay, what would be the Northwest?
They would have to consider some other alternatives such as Northwest Community or Northwest Central Dispatch, the Jets Board and Des Plaines, which is actually going through a reevaluation phase right now, or consolidating with some other police dispatch center if you were trying to accomplish that same task for law enforcement. As far as Red Center, it is on a call basis for service. There's a budget that's generated every year at Red Center, and that is then divvied up based upon call handling per call basis there. So as your calls go up, you pay a little bit more. As your calls stabilize, you pay a little bit less.
Okay. All right. Chief Benson, have you guys looked into an outside call center?
Yes, we have. In 2007, Chief McIsaac and I worked for quite a while coming up with a dispatch analysis, and Chief McIsaac actually put together, I want to say 6 or 8 different options of what it would cost. And that was the same time we were trying to make the decision, would it be more cost beneficial to go to like a Northwest Central Dispatch, or this was the beginning stages of the talking stages of our major remodel project, and should we go forth with that or put our efforts into dispatching elsewhere? I'd be more than happy to provide you this copy of the 2007 analysis. It seems that it would probably be slightly less to pay at Northwest Central Dispatch for straight dispatching, but that doesn't take into account we're still going to need somebody when the public walks into our building to greet them, to say I need an officer. I would never recommend something like a ring down where you'd walk into a phone and call somebody in Arlington Heights to tell them that you have an emergency or wanted to make a report. I think a person should always be there. During daytime hours during the week, could that be records? Possibly. We could possibly do that, but you'd still have nights and weekends, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and that's the portion of the equation that has never made it, in my mind, and in this analysis, financially beneficial for us to do that. If you wanted to forego having a human person when you walk into a police department, the numbers come out pretty close. Probably a little favorable to the village, but it's not, I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend it. I could see vandalism in our lobby during the night and off hours, weekends, holidays when records personnel aren't working. And a lot of thought went into should we dispatch elsewhere. And we did a very extensive study on the cost-benefit analysis and the service to the community and the expectations. And I don't think that the slight cost benefit, if we did go there, would offset us, would be beneficial to us, giving up the control, the personal contact with having the dispatchers there, the attention. We have 100% attention to the needs of the Wheeling citizens. And in addition to that, when we did make this decision and we built that room, we built it for the future. If there were ever, and I've said this before, if there were ever a perfect storm, and there are a couple we're looking into right now, where it would be financially beneficial to another municipality in the village of Wheeling to dispatch for another police department, we would certainly look into it. But again, the startup costs is what really kill you, because our radio system isn't compatible with the ones out of Northwest Central Dispatch, so you'd have a lot of, in addition to the annual cost of the physical dispatching, there would be a tremendous amount, and I believe in here it's about $1.3 million up front to make equipment compatible, to make records management and computer-aided dispatch software compatible in order to make it happen. And again, I've always said in a perfect storm, if we can get somebody to come to us, and it would offset the deficit in the 911 budget and it'd be beneficial beyond that, we certainly would do that. And it's in the very infancy stages right now, but we are doing it.
All right, that was my second question, if we could bring someone else in. All right, thank you.
Do you have it? Trustee here.
Yes, thank you. I would be in favor of the scales. I think there is quite a bit of additional revenue that could be generated from those if they're used properly. Where the location is, to me, it really doesn't matter as long as they're being utilized. And one question I do want to ask you, how much do we pay every year? And I know we've talked about this crossing guard expense. And if so, can we try to push that cost on to the school districts?
I know that's been done over the years, Trustee, here, and it's just always been something where the schools have told us they don't have the funds, and it comes down to a safety issue. And I think for what we pay them and the job that they do, I think that it's certainly a wise investment. And
Absolutely. I'm just thinking of different ways of kind of shifting a little bit off of, the village and bring it back. And that would be similar to some of the human services.
It's been done in the past, and I would certainly have no problem approaching the school district to see if they would be willing to offset some of those costs.
And one last thing.
Trustee here, if I may, the answer to your question is approximately $80,000 a year.
Okay, see, so that would be a start. The other thing too is like raising some of the fees for the administrative tows. Does that automatically go up every year, or can we raise them, or if we raise them?
The amount we set for the administrative tows, the $500 that we set, was based on, at the time, it was controversial. There was certain municipalities that were charging excessively more.
Right.
And I believe, and maybe Mr. Frollo could help me out, I believe there was actually something from the courts that came out that justified the $500 amount being a fair amount based on the needs of and the expenditures of what it takes for an officer with an arrest, everything through court, that the $500, I think it's a safe and fair number.
Sounds fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other? Trustee Adjers.
Hi, thanks. Going back to the scale, Chief, you gave the example of $5,000 fine. The net benefit to the village on that dollar amount, you said less court costs.
Yes.
Ballpark on a $5,000 fine, what would be the net benefit to the village?
This is going to be completely ballpark. I would say probably in low 4,000.
Really?
Yes. It's a ballpark. And just to clarify another point, this wouldn't be separate. Mainly it would be our traffic officers. As far as court goes, it wouldn't be separate. They're going to have to be in court anyway for this is just it's a traffic ticket with a heavier fine based on the amount of weight over. So it's not like we would have to spend more money for them to go to court. It would be their regular court date. There's no separate truck enforcement court date.
Okay. You showed the clip on here about $500,000 in revenues that are generated through the police department. But as you know, the state, the county sets rules, and our guys work hard to get there. It costs the village a lot of money to get them there, especially DUIs, when I got educated very well by Mr. Handler the other day. A lot of stuff I didn't know and realized that Cook County is a separate animal from Lake County. Lake County's got some more avenues for municipalities to make money versus Cook County. It's all about them and not us, and we're the guys paying it. So the revenue source sometimes is very deceiving. Well, we're raising $500,000 in new revenues, but it's probably pretty close to a wash, I would say, or damn really close to a wash, based on personnel being there and making that happen. It kind of offsets it a little bit, but it's not a profitable measure, and I think Michael would agree with that. Again, kudos to what you've done in the last 2-3 years dealing with what you do. I would love to give you 6 police officers. I really would. But it's hard with this deficit thing and coming up with a financial plan for the next few years to try to help us get out of the routine of what we've been doing for the last 5 years. Okay. I like what you've done with the overtime. The manager's recommendation was about a 7.6% decrease of the overtime that you had asked for. I look at the numbers over the last 2-3 years, you've never come close to what you budgeted for. I'm just going to throw this out there. If that number can get increased a little bit more, just for number purposes, I mean, you would know best. I don't want to do anything to hamper the department, but I see the trend since 2009, 2008 till now. You've never even reached the $500,000 mark on overtime, which is a credit to both you guys because you're watching what you're doing. You had proposed over $600,000. The manager's got it down to $550,000. If we can get that, maybe even closer to that $5,000. We can always make adjustments down the road. God forbid there's an emergency or something happens. But for trying to get numbers down a little bit and give us a better handle on what we're trying to do, I would like to see that. The scale thing, I got to ask you, you put it there. In your mind, there's got to be a reason, a good reason why you want to put it there other than the wear and tear on the roads. Is there something else you want to say why you thought that was a good idea to put into your budget this year?
We were challenged to come up with sources of revenues, and to me, this certainly seems like a win-win. I think it'll bring in plenty of revenue and at the same time benefit the village and county and state roads.
Okay, and you don't feel that it's a burden on your staff to have this extra revenue source? Or is it taken away from something else? That's what I'm concerned about.
I look at it as another enforcement tool.
Okay. I'll take your judgment into consideration. I think if you feel that's not going to be a burden on you and it is a revenue source for us, then that's something that we should look at.
I think it's a burden that we could absorb because it's important enough for the enforcement aspect of it.
I would just agree with that. I worked trucks back when I was in traffic. I think one of the things we would do if we did obtain the scales is we would educate businesses within this community. That wasn't done in the past. What we did in the past is we just took them to the scales at different trucking yards as long as the scales were certified. I think if there was an education process that went out to the businesses, they were aware that the Wheeling Police now are doing truck enforcement, I think that that would benefit everybody. And taking that step with those scales is going to give our traffic officers a little different avenue on doing different types of duties as well as, for revenue.
The only thing I'm concerned about is there are a couple major projects going on in the community where you are seeing excessive truck traffic, heavy truck traffic.
Absolutely.
I would hope that we would use our little common sense, all of us, to realize what's going on here in town and not to really target those kind of things that are happening. You know what I mean? It just creates...
Yeah, I believe it's all about letting them know what is being done and being fair in that regard, like we do with anything that we start up here at the police department. It's not just about starting the enforcement activities and really aggravating people. And like Trustee Lang said, doing this program would not be about causing traffic hindrances out there, because I think if you start doing that, it's going to create all sorts of issues with the motoring public, and that's not the goal of this program.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Were you looking, if you're looking for consensus on the scales?
I would in a second if I
You will,
may.
okay.
Thank you. I was just going to say, when you talk about the scales and when you talk about the traffic with the trucks, this summer I had the privilege one day a week to be by Milwaukee Avenue. Did you ever hear those trucks and the size and how large they are? So I think the scales would benefit the village with the businesses knowing, and in the long run, we're going to save money because we're going to save on the maintenance of the streets. So now I will ask for a consensus, if I may, on the scales. Mr. Stavros, you have something?
I would just like to say that if it's contemplated to put a fixed scale in somewhere, that I would certainly be in all favor for it to be Public Works. We would use that scale for weighing out our trucks in the wintertime. Right now, when we load the salt, we have no way of tracking the poundage that goes out and comes in. We estimate a bucket load to be 2,000 pounds, but that weight changes with the moisture that's in the salt. So when we calibrate our equipment to spread it at so many pounds per mile, it's kind of hard when we don't know exactly what we're putting on the trucks. They do have equipment that it's rather expensive, bucket scales, I guess they call them, that could go on a loader. I'm not sure what they run, but I'm just bringing it up. If you're going to look at a place for a fixed base scale, I would certainly
welcome it.
Throw in Public Works for putting it there.
Director Stavros brings up a good point that I actually stood up to ask the chief when we were discussing the scales, and we were not going to bring it up, but since Tony does, if we do this a fixed base scale, we would have to do it at Public Works. The parking lot here couldn't handle truck traffic, physically couldn't handle truck traffic, and it makes the most sense, I think, as several trustees said, that it's in the center of town. So if we do this and we do a fixed base, which we'll go through the whole process, if we do that, we'll just do it at Public Works.
Yeah, but the cost
And before we continue, Trustee Lang has one more little thing, and then we will do the consensus.
Just about the fixed location for the scales. Wouldn't you have to send police officer then escort to the fixed base? And wouldn't that be taking kind of that officer out of duty for however long that takes? In my opinion, I'd leave the location of it up to you guys. Because I think that's, you'll know best what best use of your time. But portable, having them portable sounds like the right thing to do, because you can move it to different areas of the village and solve a lot of problems, and then lend it to Public Works over the winter. So, thank you.
All right. Now may we have a consensus, starting with Trustee Brady?
I said no, but you know, Trustee Argyris brought up a very good point I wasn't thinking of. This year, maybe even in the next year, we're going to have hundreds of bombers moving dirt from right here over to some site on Lake Cook Road, and they would destroy the streets in no time. They're notorious for loading overweight. Maybe it would be a bad idea if they knew we had a scale. They'd be a little bit more careful of it. Would it be portable or permanent? I'll leave that up to you guys. If two departments can share it, maybe the permanent one would work better. Maybe not. I don't know. I'll leave that up to the manager and you two departments. But yeah, I'll say yes.
Trustee here?
I'd be in favor of portable, not fixed at this time, because if it becomes successful, then we can go with the fixed. But I think the cost for a fixed base scale would be astronomical.
Trustee Lang?
Agreed.
Trustee Hein?
I'm in favor of the portable scales, and if we were to do a permanent scale, it should be probably over at Public Works, and between the police department and the Public Works personnel, probably could do some cross-training where there'd be somebody there to do the actual physical weighing of the vehicles and such. So, also, we have a tremendous amount of trucks coming down on a daily basis going into waste management with the hauling of the 18-wheelers with the garbage and all that kind of stuff, and it is taking a toll on our roads, so I'm all in favor of that.
Thank you. Trustee Vogel?
Well, do we know what the cost for a fixed scale would be? Do you have any idea?
I do not know, but if this program is successful enough, maybe we can talk about purchasing one for it, but I do not know. But we will make this available to, I had not, and I apologize, I had not talked to Director Stavros about it. I didn't think about the benefits to his department, but we will certainly, if we get this, make it available on a portable basis, and if it's successful, maybe approach it for a permanent one there and a portable, which would be the best of both worlds.
Okay, I'm for it.
Thank you. Trustee Juris?
Sure. Sure.
And myself, yes. Now, my next question is to the board, the recommendation of a new patrol officer. So I'd like some thoughts or your consensus of yes or no. I feel and have felt for many, many years, we need to have an addition. I know that it was supposed, we were looking at it many more than one, but I think with an additional one, I think that it is a start. And if you do it one, by the time the 4 or 5 years come, we will have a complete patrol business out there because the officers do go. And sometimes all 4 or 5 or 6 officers have to go to one. And I think an additional officer would help production, if you will, if that's the correct word, in servicing our residents and our businesses. So I would ask for any comment, or I'd like to have a consensus of the thoughts of the board for one patrol officer. Trustee Lang?
As much as I'd like to add personnel to every department, the personnel expenses are really what's killing our budget right now, because it's not just salary, it's pension, it's benefits, and so on. I'd like to stay the course, at least for this year, with increases in personnel, as much as I would like to. I know it's important to have, in all your departments, more people out on the roads, better services, and so on. You guys have been doing such a great job with less right now, and sorry to have to say, I'm not in favor of expanding that for any of the departments. You're doing such a great job, and really, it's appreciated. But right now, I can't see expanding it. Thank you.
Trustee Brady?
Over the past 4 years, we've laid off 38 people, each department. And I sincerely don't believe that things have changed around that much that we can start adding yet. And like Ray said, you guys are doing a great job with what you got. Let's keep it going for another year at least. I'd say no.
Trustee here.
Being part of a police agency, I can understand why and where you could utilize these personnel. But at this point, I have to concur with my colleagues. I think maybe we'll readdress it next year. Thank you.
Trustee Adjuris.
Love to give you 6, but this year with 3.6 in the hole, it's hard. Can't.
I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I can't. No, I can't.
All right, we need to.
I said
And
that.
Trustee Vogel.
Now, again, as much as I'd like to see it happen, not this year.
Trustee Hein.
This is a very complex issue, and I would like to see another officer, a patrol officer. If it was an administrative type officer, I would question it. But with the amount of traffic we have in the major streets that we have, and the thousands of cars and vehicles that we have coming every day, I would like to see another officer and a real emphasis because of that. I would like to see better than half of that salary being deducted out of your overtime. And a real conservative effort. I know you worked very hard at it, but I know we got to just do a little bit more to that. But I would be in favor of a patrol officer.
And I myself, as in years past and as of this budget, would like the patrol officer. But the consensus I see of the board is not to add an officer. And maybe down the line in between the budget when we're done, and as you get the scale, maybe it will show that we need to have that. Mm-hmm. And maybe then the board would all come into consensus to add that policeman.
Understood.
So I also thank you for all the service. You do an excellent job, and there's no question. And yes, with less, but that's why we have overtime. The overtime has to come because we have less, or someone gets ill, or something transpires. So I would hope that maybe 6 months from now, we can take a look and maybe we can add that officer at one time or another. But at this time, the board has decided that they prefer not to add an officer, and we'll look at the scale and go forward. Thank you.
Madam President?
Trustee Agiris?
Thank you. I had brought up during my comments where I'd like to get that overtime budget down to that $500,000 mark. Because the last 3 years, it's been nowhere near it. Just for purposes of knocking down some dollars off the budget. Remember, anybody can always come back during the calendar year and ask for an amendment to something based on an emergency or something. But realistically, I think it's a good policy that the manager started it. I like to piggyback on it and just get it down to that $500,000, which will reduce their budget an additional $65,600.
I don't think we need a consensus. Just the manager would make an adjustment, if that would meet with the board, or would you like a consensus on reducing the overtime expenditures done in the police department?
Well, I think, Mr. Johnny, you say something? No, before I say so, I was going to, go ahead.
Trustee, here you have something, or
No, I'll
Mr.
follow
Vandulis?
up at the end.
No, I was just saying, obviously, if we can do that, that'd be great, but I'd like to hear from the village, or the village manager's office.
Albert, do you have the, to date, what's been spent in 5102?
While that number is being looked up, just a general comment on overtime. Police and Public Works are the two most difficult departments to project overtime. Obviously, with Public Works, it's mostly related to snow. It's mostly weather-related. But overtime is, for the most part, emergency response. So I think we certainly, and of course, Albert is about to answer this question, I think we certainly can lower that number with the understanding that if emergencies happen, we're still going to respond. So as we look towards next year, if it is needed, then that line item will simply go over budget. So I don't think, and then again, speaking before Albert responds, I don't think that that's going to be detrimental to the operations of the department. And if necessary, we will just go over next
Well,
week.
year-to-date in 2012, based on the budget, we're at $412,000, and you had budgeted $566,000 in 2012. So I don't know if this is
We're
as
at
of September.
470 as of today.
And which will put us well over 5 by the first of the year with a 2.5% increase with salaries. And last year really wasn't, and not just with Public Works, but one good storm, there was really no snowstorms. Those caused a lot of higher back, and we've been very fortunate without having some of the major crimes we've had in years past. I can understand what you're saying, but I don't think I would take it down that much.
Trustee Argyris, Director Monchain just did the trend for projecting to the end of this fiscal year, and they are at 531,000.
Okay. Let me ask you this, and I'll be very candid. What new policies in place can be put in place to try to get that overtime down?
I think if you looked over the last few years, the numbers will show that we've done everything we possibly can. What we can control, we have. What we can't control, storms, crimes, major crimes, task force, those are things that I don't think it would be fair for me to give you a lower number knowing that we'd most likely be set up for failure.
Okay, I'm not saying to fail. I'm not saying to give me the numbers. I'm asking you, is there anything within the organization that can help and reduce overtime? Period. And if there is, I'm not asking for answers today. If you guys can brainstorm with your commanders and your sergeants and the folks over there, is there a system out there that can be different today than what we've been doing in the past? Okay? We have a lot of guys making a lot of money on overtime, let's be honest, and they're working for it, yes. But is there a system that we can put in place? Because just like the manager said in the beginning of this budget hearing, today is a new era. I mean, the way we do business is different. What can we do different in that department to help alleviate some dollars off of the overtime budget, which is huge? That's all I'm asking. I'm not looking for answers today, but please, if you can get back to us in the very near future, I welcome it. You know, if we can help you, great. That's it.
Trustee Argyris, can I recommend a $25,000 reduction as
That's
opposed
fine.
to?
Just something. I'm looking for numbers, guys. That's all. Something. We're spending 16, we took off 25, our net gain is 9. That's how you do the numbers, right? Okay.
Trustee Brady.
Thank you. Chief, can I ask you, when you contract out for traffic control or security at festivals and all that kind of stuff, is that goes in overtime? You know?
You're talking about outside employment?
Yeah.
Or that?
Yeah,
Well, it depends. If it's a traffic detail, it's at straight time. If it's a security where law enforcement duties would be more likely to occur, then it's at officers' overtime, and that's an agreement between the union and us.
Right, and is that in the overtime costs?
If it's traffic, no. If it's security, yes.
When you, St. Joe's every Sunday morning?
That's straight time.
That's straight time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because over the Korean festivals, they've had several of them last year. You had to put several guys over there. If that's an overtime, we're getting reimbursed for that, aren't we?
100% plus a 10% admin fee.
That overtime isn't a true picture because there's things in there that we're getting paid for.
That's separate. It's a zero balance account that pays for itself with the 10% admin fee, but no, that's not part of it. The church detail is not budgeted in our budget and taken out of the 5102.
No, but we had Family Fest and all these other things going on.
Those were. If it was a village event, if it was traffic, it was straight time, if it was security, it was overtime, and that was, which is why you see some of the lined out items in 5102 specific to events that we know are going to occur, parades, when we used to have Family Fest, items like that.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask something on the 911? I'm
Certainly.
sorry, I just thought of it. On the 911 budget itself, are we figuring salaries of any sort in that? Is that combined with the Red Center, the total?
Salaries are not included as far as...
They are? Or
They are not.
They're not? Okay, I thought so. And to answer your question, it's almost $60, just over $60 per call with Red Center. So if you look at your $260,000 that we're paying Red Center, it comes out to about 4,700 calls annually, just fire-related calls. It's $60 a pop. So it's a lot. That's why it was so important for the surcharge, folks, because we knew this was coming today. Where we had to add, which we didn't need, another line item on our budget.
Yeah, was the 911, and
That's
it
right.
did not pass, and
That's
that
right.
cost us,
Because for 20-plus years, almost 30 years,
Right.
it's self-funded.
starting next year, it's not self-funded,
That's right.
and it'll keep going up,
That's correct.
as we discussed. Thank you. Mr. Fondilis, did you have anything additional to say? And
I
Chief
don't.
Benson?
Does the board agree then a $25,000 reduction to the overtime totals and the addition of the scales?
Yes.
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 Assistant Finance Director Albert Walczak is running a total for the day. So when we get to the end and we talk about the bottom line and what our new deficit is, as we go through all of these, we'll be able to give you the accurate to...
I myself will not, I'm for the scales, but not for the deduction of the overtime for the police department. Because that'll prove itself. So the rest of the board, I assume then the rest of the board, when you did the scales, you wanted the deduction of the $25,000 in their budget also. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee here? Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee Adjuris? Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Yes. And I am the dissenting vote. I do not, which doesn't matter in this case, but just for the record, I do not think that that should be lowered.
And just a quick comment on that.
Certainly.
That can always be amended and added, as Trustee
Absolutely.
Argyris said, so.
Can always be, everything can be amended, but we keep taking away where times are needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
You take the bullets out of your guns now, guys. You can take the bullets out of your guns now.
Can I take my vest off, too?
And we now have the
Speaking
fire
of vests.
department. Chief McIsaac,
Morning.
good morning. We'll adjust our,
Take one, pass them down.
He's just going to read to us.
Take one of this.
Copy of the slides. So they can take notes. I got two.
This too?
No, I
Get an extra.
First of all, let me thank you today. It's my pleasure to present the 117th budget of the Wheeling Fire Department. You have in front of you the responsibilities associated with the fire department. They're wide and diverse. As I've mentioned to you several times over history, the phrase fire department is really not an accurate reflection anymore of today's modern fire services. We cover a wide variety of functions within the community. There's the typical fire suppression that you see, the emergency medical treatment and transportation, but it's behind the scenes protecting Chicago Executive Airport, to having people capable of handling very diverse and unique rescue and hazardous materials situations that occur in our industrial facilities. As you know, we're a community that has some floodplain issues associated with it, with a creek, over 100 ponds and detention basins within our community, and a very large waterway, the Des Plaines River. Whoops. I jumped ahead there, sorry. In addition to that, we also provide inspectional services to our commercial and industrial occupancies to ensure their life safety, protection, and safety equipment and procedures are in place. We provide public education programs throughout the community, particularly in our schools. And as what's already been referenced here earlier, we are a member of the Red Center Regional Emergency Dispatch Center that provides complex fire and EMS or emergency medical service dispatching. The number of employees has not changed from the last several years. Basically, most of our staff is associated with providing hands-on services within the community, whether it's through emergency services or through the inspectional services. As shown here, we currently have 55 total employees. 53 of them are full-time, 2 of them are part-time. And much like the other departments that you've discussed and are going to be seeing later today, we have gone through some staff reductions as well as a result of the last several years of economic struggle. As presented to you today, our budget is $9.2 million. It's an increase of $616,000 over the current budget. Like everybody else, personnel is the biggest chunk of our expenses. However, I should point out that I have probably the most expensive capital equipment fleet in all of the village, and it accounts for almost 4% of my total budget for the SURF account. And included in our budget is that approximately 1% transfer of funds to the 911 fund as a result of underfunding there in order to pay for dispatching services. So to add it up, approximately 90% of my budget is associated with all of those items, keeping a remainder of 10% of my fund to pay for the operational side. Those are things such as fuel, training, replacement equipment, replacement medical supplies, etc. And as I noted here, we do pay on the 911 fund, which is in a separate account that I share with the police department. There is a reflection of $292,000 going to Red Center. Like everybody else, we've been tracking performance measurements. As you may remember as a board, a number of years ago, the decision was to reallocate existing resources between 3 locations instead of 2. And one of those targets was to try to reduce our overall response time. Our target is under 6 minutes. It was higher when we had the large travel distances. Year to date, we're on track to be at 5 minutes, 10 seconds as an average response time. As you know, we're a situation that's very hands-on, labor-intense, and so avoidable accidents and injuries. We have a target of less than 5 per year. We're on track for the year for 2. We've tried to keep our costs down per call. This is kind of a relative cost. Obviously, a fire is more labor-intensive than an elevator alarm or something like this, but we try to keep around $2,000 cost per call. Our calls for the year on projection right now are down very slightly, less than 0.5%, but what's more interestingly enough is our medical calls are up 1.4%. And as we've discussed over the last few years, our medical calls, the complexity of those calls has continued to rise as a result of a combination of situations: unemployment, loss of jobs, loss of health care. We're seeing a rise in our advanced life support calls. I believe it is directly related to the fact that people wait to call us, and when they call us, they're much sicker and they're in a more delicate situation. And I think that is directly a factor associated with the local economy. When you look at our calls over the last 10 years, we've grown almost 1,000 calls per year. That fluctuates a little bit, but on average, we're growing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4% a year, 4 to 5% a year in call volume. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. As far as revenue streams within the fire department, our biggest chunk is ambulance billing, generating just a little bit under $500,000 a year. We do permitting associated with the fire safety equipment that goes into new construction and remodeling, generate some fees. And as you know, we have an active CPR program, which we recently actually reduced the fees in order to try to increase the number of enrollment in those programs, to try to get more citizens involved in emergency preparedness. And we do our operating right now under a current grant of $38,000 associated with getting all of our people up to the new national certification known as Advanced Firefighter. And just to sum up, in the last several years, a little over the last 5 years, we've actually obtained $1.1 million in grants, and they're all spelled out right here. It was alluded to in Director Monshane's report earlier about the 3 firefighter grant that is coming up for expiration. We did benefit totally for $488,000 over the last several years to offset some of our costs associated with our personnel as a result of that. And much like law enforcement, all of the grants that we're now seeing out there, both federally and statewide, as you know, because of the downturn in the economy, are drying up. Right now, most of the federal fire grant, the funding has been cut by 50%. So with that, I'm ready to answer any questions you might have about the budget in general.
Do you have any questions? Trustee Vogel.
Quick question, Chief. The $54,000 that was moved to the committee, I'll call it, what exactly is that is going to be used for? Do we know?
Fundamentally, we do. Specifically, no. The way the state statute is written regarding the foreign fire insurance tax that you're referring to,
right,
it is listed that it must be used for the welfare, maintenance, and benefit of the fire department. It cannot be used for personnel and expenses of that nature. The original intent of that state law was to pay for funding for equipment that may not be readily available or accessible to the department through other taxing means. As part of the ordinance that's before you on Monday night, there is a section in there that the board, as defined by that ordinance, will have to develop a list annually of what that money will be used for, specifically spelled out, and then it will be tracked obviously by you as the board and the finance director as well. At this point, because we're just creating it, I do not have a definitive list obviously developed through that committee.
Okay, going forward, once that list is complete, will that be able to be used to offset any of these budget items?
Well, I guess the first point I need to point out is that before you is a budget that's already been cut $165,996.
I understand it.
No, but understand is we're down to very little left.
Right.
Will we be able to perhaps use it for some other items? Yes.
Or to replace some of the items that were cut?
That's correct.
That was my question. All right, thank you.
Trustee Lang.
Thank you. And looking over your request for the bulletproof jackets, ballistic jackets. Just off the top, is there anything that you could do fundraising-wise? Has that anything like that ever been explored where, I mean, it's something that you feel that your department needs, but is there another way to go around to get it other than putting it in or requesting in our budget? Is there fundraising, something that other communities have done for things like this, or grants from local businesses, something like that? Have you thought of anything like that?
Well, as I alluded to, we've been very successful in grants, but grants are drying up, and they're usually limited into where we can put our priorities. And as a result, we've tried to put our grant requests federally and state-wise, since you're limited in the number you can apply for, into areas where we saw the immediate need, training, equipment, those types of things. Obviously, that's something we can consider down the road. I will tell you that the previous ballistic vests that we have, which are not medically conducive to wear, they're very restricted. They're more like heavy flak vests, if you will. Those were funded and provided to us by AMVETS. So we have had a relationship with the community in providing us some degree of protection. What we're asking for and have been asking for a number of years is the lighter weight, more form-fitting vests similar to what the police department wears.
I would want to try to explore an AMVETS or something like that again to provide some sort of fundraiser for that. I think it's a good way. You got it before, you possibly can get it again if asked for it. If it's something that you feel that's important, the way we're cutting budgets right now, I wouldn't consider this as being something that necessary, but you obviously do, so maybe there's other ways. And that's all I'm asking is,
yes, sir.
Let's look at other ways as well.
We will.
Trustee Adjurst.
Thank you. Well, you touched base on that on Monday, creating this commission or whatever the case may be with the foreign tax, letting them have $54,000. I would hope one of the first items they would buy is these protective vests. Because like you said, this thing has been on the budget right for the last 10 years with you. So I would say if this is such an important thing, that $54,000 would be the first item they should buy are these protective vests. And I think get that off the budget and we don't have to deal with it anymore. Because you make a good argument for it. The world is different today and they are in danger. And I would hope they would take those dollars and buy things like this versus other things they may have wishes for, but this is very important. Thanks.
I should add that within the last month I've reached out to private sector granting funding. And right now that is an unknown, but I'm not sure how to turn this on.
There, I think it's on.
Within the last month, I've reached out to a private sector type funding opportunity for these vests, among other things that we use, mostly EMS supplies. Right now that is an unknown, but it is a possibility in the future and something that we are looking into.
Or part of it, whatever. That's good.
And I do fully understand from the board's perspective, I'm not anticipating you to fund any of my expanded sheets. They're just more from a planning standpoint, and I guess to help with the conversation, I do understand that there's no funding right now.
Well, maybe next year just add a couple new ones because they're always the same ones. I had to do it, Chief.
On the part-time fire inspector, how many inspections do you or are required or do you have during the year that you're unable to do because we are lax of a part-time inspector, if I'm reading this correctly?
There are hundreds of inspections that don't get done annually. If you remember, at one time, we used to have 3 full-time inspectors and a part-timer. We now operate with 1 full-timer and a part-timer. And as you recently heard several weeks ago, through the efforts of economic development, our industrial park is back down to only a 6% vacancy number. So the good part is our industry has rebounded. The bad part is we're not getting in there even on an annual basis anymore. We are instead taking our resources and applying them to the key areas where there's life safety hazards, high volume chemical storage or high-risk categories. Our schools, our restaurants, places like this where we have hundreds of people congregate, our daycares and communities, Penray, Pactive, places like that.
I bring it up again, and I guess I do it every year. And I know that funds are, but the part-time fire inspector, with the way our industrial center is now, not able to get in there, if you will, if that's a correct word, for the safety of not only for the building, but for the safety of the people that live in there or work in there and the surrounding areas. You know, it's a frightening thing when you hear on the television or see what happens to some of the firemen, if you will, through fire. And sometimes for the industrial, I think it's because we have lack of inspection. Several years back, we had a real large fire, I think right over here on, I think off of Wheeling Road at the one time.
You know, Wings Manufacturing.
Wings. So I would ask if the board would consider the small dollar amount, which is $29,845, to have that part-time inspector for the safety and security of the industrial and the workers that work in all those buildings as we continue to add on, which I'm sure that we're going to have some more buildings covered and have new businesses in there. So I would ask in consideration of the $29,845, which isn't even $30,000, if the board would consider that. And Trustee Agiris, you have a...
Well, yeah, I do. Thank you, Madam President.
Sure.
I think what we did with this fire inspector mentality, working with staff, and there's been a lot going on in the last year, and I think that's why we alleviated a couple of the positions there, to come up with a game plan, and it's been talked about farming out, charging the individuals, especially like the industrial areas, commercial areas, and it's like for their annual inspections, and come up with a game plan, a plan. Okay, here's a perfect example of trying to keep personnel to a minimum and using outsourced resources out there to accomplish the job without putting the burden of the taxpayers and hiring more people, but benefits and pensions and everything else that we've been doing here. This is where we need to start thinking smart. This was brought up last year. That's why the positions aren't there this year. That's why they weren't there last year. So again, to remind you, John, and to work with the chief, let's come up, and I know community development has been cross-working with some of these programs as well with their inspectors, building inspectors and stuff like that, and trying to work department to department together and creating a cohesiveness out there with the community and getting the job done. We need to expand that. We talked about expanding that, and I think with all the changes that occurred with personnel in the last year, it was an adjustment period, and I understand that. And it takes time to see where all the pieces of those puzzles go, but now I think the upcoming years, the challenge is going to be is how do we perfect it, how do we get better at it, how do we get economically better at it. So that's why I'm surprised to see this in here, to be honest with you, because I thought a game plan is going forward on trying to do something that's more efficient and cost-effective.
I think, if I may, and I
Sure.
might be incorrect.
Sure.
I think when we cut, I forget, my voice gets so loud sometimes I just figure it's screaming. I think when we were cutting the inspectors at that time in the payroll was because we didn't have as much or buildings that we had to look at, and all of a sudden you take Protectobed. That was the largest piece that was vacant for several years. Now they are in full force, which now they need that. That's just one example of how the industrial center has brought up. So that's why I'm bringing it up at this time.
And on the contrary to what you said, I believe it was because things were so overwhelming and it was putting such a burden on the department itself, and it continues to do that, that the talk of farming out and going other avenues to accomplish our goal of protection and fire inspections and stuff like that was something that we wanted to look at. Thank you.
It's all right. That's why we're here.
I know.
So, Trustee Brady.
Thank you. If I remember correctly, back, it was discussed when we were, several years ago, when this crisis first started, that we were going to more or less double up with community development. We have inspectors, we have health inspectors, building inspectors, plumbing inspectors, electrical inspectors, fire inspectors, all going to the same place. And a lot of these issues, especially with some of the safety stuff, can be identified by anybody. With a little education, our building inspectors could recognize a fire, a problem, a potential fire problem, and flag it without sending 4 or 5 people in to do the same job. But that's not neither here nor there. One thing I was going to ask you, we charge, I don't know, Keith, if you can answer this, John or Michael, how is the collection going on ambulance calls? Because we do charge for them. Are we getting paid quite regularly, or?
I can address that. We're averaging about 80% collections. We're one of the highest in the area, and we're generating just under $500,000 a year.
Where's that revenue? Is that revenue in here?
That's revenues in the budget. It is.
It is?
It's listed under there. Matter of fact, it was on the slide I shared you where we're projected. I think I took that right out of the budget where we're at right now.
Okay, well, as long as we're addressing that, and 80% isn't bad.
Supposed to be, yeah.
We're projected to generate, to bring in $495,720 this year.
Trustee Brady, it's page 23 of your budget, if you
Or
want to see it, but the number the chief just said is correct.
I'll believe you. Okay, thank you.
If I can just comment on just one item to clarify. Over the last 5 years, a lot of effort has been spent in working very closely with community development. And a lot of things have changed from the model that was 5 years ago. As an example, both departments are doing small plan reviews in-house, and the more complex ones are in fact farmed out, including the fire drawings for sprinklers and alarm systems for places such as Protected Bed that was referenced, huge projects. And those costs are directly passed on to the business. We used to do all of those in-house. Now we don't do all those in-house. As far as the inspectors, you are correct in one sense, Trustee Brady, that when you get into an office environment, you get into a very small complex like a Subway sandwich shop, the complexity of fire safety issues is relatively simple, and in fact, many times are picked up by the health inspectors who are making those inspections and dealing with it. But we have almost 2,000 industrial occupancies out there, and they are highly complex facilities, and the fire inspectors are doing much more complex inspections than perhaps you envision. We're dealing with everything from chemical mixing and chemical handling to the explosive and toxic natures of those chemicals. They have very complex fire suppression equipment in those buildings. They're exiting and emergency explosion venting, dust collection, etc. are very complex issues that are dealt with by those inspectors. And that's not something that's going to be handled by a health inspector or a general property maintenance inspector. So there is a lot of things that you have asked us to do, we have in fact done. And the cooperation between the two departments is second to none. So like I said, it's not that we're going backwards. We're actually trying to accommodate the fact that our industrial facilities are more occupied, which is, like I said, a very positive note. But we're not adding Subway sandwich shops and offices. We're filling the Protected Beds and places like this, and that's where the need for these kind of inspections are.
How often do we visit these units?
They should be done at least annually, and I can tell you that there's facilities now that are years without us getting into due to the downturn in staffing. Like I said, I physically can't do it with 1.5 people. You take a facility like Pactiv, or you take Hospital Linen, which is less than 1 million square feet, you devote time, you're not looking at an inspection that's an hour, 15 minutes, and you're out of there. You're looking at days. And like I said, with 1.5 people, you're not going to inspect every building in this town on an annual basis. And our schools, I will tell you, we get in twice a year. Our daycares, we get in twice a year. Our restaurants, we make sure we get to at least once a year, if not twice, because those are the life safety areas of our community. The high hazard areas, Pactiv, Penray, places like that, we're in there at least annually, if not more, because again, the danger, the risk, and et cetera, for both the employees and, for to be honest, negative press. If something were to happen, it would be a national news event. We're in those facilities, but, you know, like I said, the rest of the small facilities, particularly our industrial condo complexes, I can tell you that there's some that we haven't been in years.
All right, thank you.
Trustee Hein.
Do we charge a fee for any of these inspections?
No, we do not charge for inspections. It's adopted as part of our codes to do that. Obviously, in the past, it's been viewed that that's part of what a business license pays for. Again, that's a policy decision by you.
Getting back to what you said, that a lot of these places we have in our industrial park are very specialized, and they bring a complexity of issues relative to safety. Wouldn't it be wise for us to come up with a plan for working out a inspection basis where we would be charging a fee depending on the complexity of that inspection and what's involved, so that we can generate some fees so we can pay for these inspectors?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Trustee Hein. In 2008, I made a presentation to the board at that time and showed them a whole series of options for fees associated with fire prevention. And again, at that time, the board that was seated here said that was part of the business licenses and rejected that recommendation.
Okay, it's now 2012, we're going into 2013. Maybe it's time that we look at it again, of some way to generate a means of getting more personnel into your department to do the job that you're trying to do. The same fee is probably being charged that we did in 2008 as now, and yet we're getting all kinds of different types of industrial people, the restaurant people, everything getting very complex with chemicals and so on and so forth. You brought that up in your presentation. I think that we should be looking at some type of means of charging for these a fee. They will probably get a better rate from their insurance company if we do go in there and give recommendations and such, and I don't know if that's possible. I'm just throwing these things out. But I, for one, would look to generating some funds so that we can do this.
Trustee Jers.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying, other communities, I know for a fact, are putting the burden on the companies themselves on an annual basis to provide a certificate regarding inspections by a qualified consultant that is approved by that municipality. Why not put more of the burden on the business itself? Upon renewal of a business license, you have to present yourself with a certificate. Unlike the liquor license, you have to present yourself with Bassett Training Certificate for those who are handling liquor. This is the kind of mentality and the way I think we should start thinking of doing things differently. We put the burden on us, staff, who is limited in a lot of spots, and I do respect that. There's only so many bodies that can handle so much. But why not come with a different way, the way we do business today, and put that burden on the PAC teams or the bed guys and this guy and that guy? Say, you know what, your business license is coming up. Here's a list of approved that we feel are consultants to do your inspection. We need that certificate. When we get it, you'll get your license. Just a thought. But I think this is the way we need to start thinking here. Because to add more personnel to do the job that you're so worried about, which I agree with, there are lots of companies out there that haven't seen a fire inspector in years, tens of years. And that needs to get closer to reality.
Trustee Lang.
Madam President, can I just interject for a second? I think what might make the most sense is to come back to the board with a presentation on what the options are. We've come to the board a number of times with the idea of raising fees, with the idea of charging, whether it's the resident for services rendered or a company for services rendered, and the board has many times turned them down. And that's fine. As Trustee Hein said, this is 2012. Things are a little different. Maybe we need to readdress it. I think the best way to do that is we can put a presentation together again and look at the way we charge these fees and maybe get some movement forward that way. So I apologize for interrupting.
No, that actually answers my question. But the one thing I want to avoid is too much of a burden on business and losing a business-friendly atmosphere. Too much. Let's kind of come halfway with it.
I agree, but you want to know, for their protection and everything else, sometimes the burden's the other way too.
True. But let's,
Got to find a happy medium. And I think most businesses would welcome having that control of hiring somebody that we're comfortable with and just getting it over with for their own protection. And then insurance companies, with big companies, require it as well. They want to make sure things are in order. So it's a benefit for everybody, not a burden.
With a business license, everybody has to pay a business license. You only pay for an inspection when you have an inspection. So it might be a year or two or whatever. So it's a come as, get the service, get the responsibility done, have a fee for it.
Trustee, I'm sorry, Manager Fondilis. Thank you.
We'll bring that to the board.
Thank you. We have any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Chief. We
Thank you very much.
appreciate
Appreciate
everything that
it.
goes on. And we see those trucks going 24/7.
very responsible budget.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thanks.
The time is now 11:27. We will break at 12 o'clock. Do you feel, I think we've announced that we will be breaking at 12, so we have Public Works is now, do you think that we can handle Public Works till 12 o'clock?
Would it please the board if I made it part of his performance reviews? To say you'll be done by 12?
Sure.
I can do that.
Easy to say no.
Otherwise, he buys lunch.
Well, how long is this PowerPoint? Half hour?
3 hours.
5 slides, right?
Got popcorn?
That's why we all gave them a form that everybody had to follow with these PowerPoint slides.
Mr. Staros.
Good morning.
Morning.
As you can see in front of you and up on the screen, Department of Public Works and consists of 6 divisions, which I have the superintendents here. The divisions are, they're called divisions, but they're almost like mini departments within a department. That's how it's really set up. There's admin, there's public building services, capital projects and design, there's fleet services, streets and forestry, and utility. The department maintains, as we all know, our streets, sidewalks, water infrastructure related facilities, both pump houses, water mains, fire hydrants, etc. Municipal buildings are all maintained by the building services. We do Julie locates, municipal parks and fountains, parkways, parkway trees, community railroad station, parking lots, seasonal lighting, special events, as well as the cemetery.
God.
Public Works consists of a director, an assistant director. We have 1 admin secretary, capital projects design manager, a civil engineer 2, currently vacant, engineering tech, and a contract, which is a contract assistant. Our engineering tech inspector is actually shared with community development. He does both inspections for community developments when it comes to the driveways, parking lots of such like that, curbs, and he also does our inspections as far as our capital projects go. A lot of them. We do contract, this year we did contract some of those inspections out. We have 4 superintendents, 2 foremen, 4 mechanics. We have 3 licensed water operators by the IEPA, which is a requirement. We need a requirement in IEPA is to have a licensed operator 24 hours, 24/7. Therefore, we have 3. Maintenance operators, we have 5 buildings, 5 staff buildings, 7 in streets and forestry, and 13 in utilities. Brings it to 46 full-time employees. 46 also includes 4 that would be in the capital design projects division. This is just a graph of from where we were at in 2003. This 46, like I say, does include 4 that's in the capital projects division. You can see these numbers increased here during the years of, this is when capital projects and design was part of the engineering division. And then engineering was split out. In 2007 and 8, we decided, we discussed it with the board because of all the parks that we were maintaining on municipal properties, that we would create a separate division, which was the forestry division. And with that, we were to hire under that auspices 4 employees, which actually never got off the ground. We did hire the certified arborist and the superintendent, and we hired a couple of the employees to work in that division, and it was to be supplemented in future years with additional employees. With the downturn of the economy, that forestry division was dismantled and put back into streets in 2010 with the reduction of staff from retirement. The street superintendent, which had retired, was then the forestry superintendent moved into the street superintendent position. So they took over the workload of what forestry was doing. When we took forestry and put that into a division, we took outside contracts and eliminated them, such as Brickman, let's say. They were doing like $60,000 a year for the fountain or more. I'm not sure what it was, but it was well above 60. Those contracts for those outside contractors were eliminated, and they were incorporated into the work of the forestry division. But the cutbacks that we had, we moved down to 47. Last year, 1 employee was put back in the utility division. The other employee, there was 2 empty spots in 11 due to the retirement of some employees. One of those spots was filled, and that went into utilities under the sewer and water fund. The other position in streets and forestry was cut, which brought us down to 46. Technically 44 if you take CIP out. Department of Public Works proposed budget for 2013 out of the general fund as well as water and sewer budget is $11,022,000. 2013 budget includes, our budget is 43.86% personnel. The remaining budget items is the miscellaneous contractual services, janitorial, landscape maintenance, parkway tree trimming, hydrant sandblasting, creek tree maintenance. Some of those contracts will be coming to you shortly. I believe they're on the agenda for Monday. Operational maintenance materials such as street signs, concrete, asphalt, everything that we have as far as material that it takes to keep the streets patched up the best we can. Dump fees, hydrant replacements, catch basins, replacement of pumps, environmental compliances, SCADA telemetry equipment to run the pumps, to run the lift stations, fuel, vehicle maintenance, our surf contributions, as well as energy. This does not include the capital projects. It excludes the capital projects. 2012 measures in performance and efficiencies, percent of the total sanitary sewer system that is clean is 13%. Post target for 2013 would be 20%. Our miles of actual preventive maintenance, PM, is currently 1,113 miles. Our proposed target in 2013 would be 800. The average response time for streetlight repairs is 3 days. Proposed target 2013 would be 2 days. Streetlight repairs are based on a lot of variables. We may get a work order in, and conditions are not favorable for us to put people in bucket trucks. So it may be 4 or 5 days before we can get to that truck, to get a streetlight fixture. And a lot of times, if we do get to the streetlight fixture, we may find that there's something wrong with that streetlight that we don't have the parts for. That would have to be ordered. 2012 performance measures at our output. 2012, this year, so far we swept 6,017 miles of streets. We've repaired 22 water main breaks, catch basins, inlets. We've cleaned out 105. Our parkway trees that we have removed are 126. 56 of the 126 removed were the EAB trees. This is a big number, 126, and this was all done in-house. Am I correct? That's correct. It's a considerable amount of work. And like I say, forestry currently has, I believe, 3 people. If you technically call forestry what it is, which all our people are cross-trained. Certainly our utility division's been a big help with some of our performances and our measures. I'd like to say, it's not up here, but this year we will have approximately about 3,000 Julie locates, which we have called in. Now, we are mandated, we belong to the Julie network, which Julie stands for the Joint Utility Locating Information for Excavations. 3,000 is a big number. Now, you have to send a person out to do locates for the underground utilities. It's whether it's streetlights, sewer, water. What happens is a lot of those times, it's not the true number. When you get like a locate ticket from Julie, and there's a locate number, NICOR has been doing a lot of gas main replacements, service line replacements. We got a locate last week for all of Tahoe Village. I mean, to locate the entire, all of Tahoe Village you're talking 40 to 50 hours of man hours to go out there and physically locate all the services out there and all the utilities. But it shows up only as one call, one ticket. Certainly we get other call outs that are 15, 20 minutes. But if you average, let's just say 40 hours a week, 50 weeks, that's about 8.2 per day on a 3 hour, that's 2,000 rather. And on a 365 day, because that's 365 days, we do emergency locates in the evening, after hours, 0 locates come in all the time. It averages about 8.2 per day. Department of Public Works fees that we've collected to this date, these are the current ones so far. Water fees, $5,427,317. Sewer, $1,271,527. Those sewer and water fees, as Michael alluded to, that is what pays the number one, the water bill to the Northwest Water Commission, and number 2, pays to maintain the system. That's why it's broken into sewer and water division and of the general fund, the streets and forestry division. Computer parking this year so far has generated $68,000. And the airport vehicle maintenance repairs this year were $179,000. Department of Public Works current approved grant funding. Now this goes back. Some of this funding was approved a few years ago. This funding is still in place. But the Dundee Road 10-foot wide path, it's the Illinois Department of Transportation grant fund. Federal share, $1,000,008. Our local share, when it all gets said and done, will be $252,000. Dundee Road's lighting, which we are moving forward on, we took it to the Northwest Municipal Council back a couple months ago, and STP program, a federal share will be $1,840,000, local share will be $626,000. The Jeffrey Avenue Bridge replacement, which we all know about, which is when you deal with federal money, it takes a while. That federal share is $1,040,000. Our share will be $260,000. Dundee Road Community Development intersection. Now this is also an STP grant. We received that back in it says 09 to 2013. Tim, I'm assuming this was received in 09 or approved in 09. It runs to the end of 2013. Am I correct, Tim?
It stays in there. It's in that list once the acquisition of properties.
And move that mic down there. I just want to make sure that the council understands what this is.
It's a placeholder. I don't want to say placeholder. It's approved by the Northwest Conference for the transportation section for the STP funding, and the project's held up for Land Act for right-of-way and easements, and once those are cleared, it could be moved to the A list for funding.
So this is on the B list. This wouldn't run out at 2013, right?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Our local share of that will be $971,000. So total estimated costs and grants, federal share is $6,156,000. Local will be $2 million. This year we also received a dual level 2 electric vehicle charging station due to the efforts of Mr. Spratt. Thank you, Chuck. And we put those 2 charging stations over at the train station, parking on the Wheeling Road. And shared cost, the total cost was $11,000. Rebate, we were rebated $5,934. It was a 50-50. Our share was $5,934. That's what I got.
Do you have any questions? Trustee Brady.
First of all, I don't know if this can be answered by you or anything else, but I'm going back to page 181 under the TIF. It calls for the town center TIF. It calls for storm sewer pipe Heritage Park flood control facility, $275,000. Why are we paying for that? Isn't the Corps of Engineers responsible for Heritage Park?
What page, Tim? I'm sorry.
181.
Is that for the...
I can answer that, Tony, if you want.
Yeah, it's for the extension of the sewer, right?
That's correct. As part of the Heritage Park project, the village is receiving detention volume as well as compensatory storage volume in the park itself. That pipe is located there so that properties along Dundee Road can access that detention and compensatory storage.
Yeah, that's what he said.
That's the conduit so that properties can use it.
I understand that, but why couldn't they pay for it? They're putting
Well,
$31 million in there. They couldn't come up with a couple $100,000 to finish it?
The reason why is because we negotiated the storage itself, and to get to it, yeah, they didn't want to pay for the pipe for us.
Well, okay,
The
thank you.
pipe's off-site, am I correct?
It is off-site, that's correct.
It runs down Northgate.
Well, actually, no, Tony, actually, it is going to be on the Park District property. We got an easement for it, and that's where the pipe is going to go on that property.
Correct.
Okay, Tony, you operate a lot of divisions here that do a lot of work with in my estimation, probably not enough people. But I'm going to know, out of all these divisions, you got 46 people. The salaries for all these people are pretty much divided up by each division. It appears that each division, you got about $300,000, $400,000 in salaries. And we all know that these people all jump into one project after another. If it's snow plowing, if it's flood control, whatever it is, everybody goes out and works. How do you maintain some sort of a idea of what the actual costs are for some of this stuff when you're crossing people over daily? You got guys from forestry plowing snow. You've got guys from the sewer department, working on forestry, and all these other things that go on during the course of everyday activities. Is there any one thing in this budget that is desperately lacking or is overly stated? Because I appreciate what's going on with this cross training, and everybody helps everybody. But how do you control where the costs are?
Well, in the instance of snow plowing, if it's related to snow plowing, in the past we've taken salaries out of MFT. Those hours are all tracked. If it's overtime for snow plowing, and say water department is utilities is out snow plowing, that overtime does not come out of utilities. It's charged off to the street fund. Those hours are all tracked and charged off up to the according accounts.
Yeah, but when you have a water main break, you probably have 6, 8 guys out there. Water department don't have 6, 8 guys.
Actually, the water department, we're the ones that steal from them.
Oh.
The rest of the departments.
Okay, excuse me, then they're one the other. but that's I just can't believe that with what you have going on in under your jurisdiction, that with 46 people, everybody having their specific duties, which have to be done daily, that you can cover it.
Perhaps I can help Director Stavros. I think the question is, there are a couple things. The hard costs for each of the projects that the divisions are responsible for are specifically located within that division's budget. So we're able to tell how much, if you want to talk about how much it costs to do minor street repairs, or how much are we spending just on trees, we can look at the hard costs to do that by looking in their division budget. The soft costs, which are the personnel that it takes, they do track their time, and although they are cross-trained, for the most part, everyone stays within their division except for emergency response. And I don't want to put words in the department's mouth, but I hope that helps to answer your question, that looking at specific projects, that they are allocated to the specific division for which is responsible.
So you do know what each division actually costs.
Yes.
And
this budget reflects that.
Yeah, because it just seemed that it was kind of the salaries, especially because that's where the crossover would be affected the most.
Yes, although in that one slide that Tony had up there, you can see I think there were 13 that are in utilities alone versus just the 5 that are in building, or the 4 that are in the fleet services division. So the salaries should be equally spread. I think where that looks a little more even is because utility can also be split between water and sewer. So now you have that 13 that comes down to 7 and 6, and 7 is the same number that's in streets and forestry, and so it looks like it's really just, let's just split it evenly among all of them, but that's really not the way it is.
In a sense, it sounds like a nightmare. Other than that, where are your expansion sheets?
They were in there.
John rip out of
They're at the end. They're at the end of his Public Works, I guess.
Public Works?
Yeah.
I didn't see them. Okay.
Page 160.
Oh, okay.
65.
Thanks. That was it for now. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Thank you. The emerald ash borer and the ash trees. What if we did nothing to to the trees? What if we left them, maybe there's a simple answer to this, but what if we left them eventually die and then we go in and take them down and replace them? I mean, what, do we expect this many to die off this year? We do.
Well, we do not treat emerald ash borer. So as the tree becomes a hazard, the tree could be half dead, and once it becomes, that happens, the limbs become a hazard because they start falling. And therefore, then when we take those down.
Well, okay, so we already...
It wouldn't have to, that doesn't mean that we wait until the tree's completely stripped of all its leaves.
Yeah. So this number on the approved expanded sheet is that we are projected as we already know what we're going to have ahead of us this year.
Right. We've already done an inventory on our trees as far as EAB goes, and that was as far as we can come up with is our best guess estimate.
That's correct. Emerald ash borer takes progression very quickly when it starts. We're always starting to see that
Lori.
progression. Emerald ash borer takes progression very quickly. We're just starting this year to see many trees starting to decline. Next year, I think we're going to see a high number that have died. Several will not leaf out next spring. Those that do leaf out are probably going to be dead. I'm anticipating probably at least 300 trees next year.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
I keep interrupting.
Sorry.
And under normal circumstances, I wouldn't feel qualified to interject on a specific project, except Lori and I actually attended a couple of seminars through the Mayor's Caucus and specific other agencies that are dealing with this, because we are in a crisis mode with the influx of EAB. You've probably seen in other communities they're spending well over $1 million of emergency money. This is something that we have to take very seriously, and I can let Lori talk more about a plan, but this isn't just a one-year fix. This year's $210,000 was as low as the number could be in order to address the most severe cases. But this will be an ongoing issue, and there's been a lot of thought about, as Director Stavros said, do we treat them, do we not? And it really doesn't make sense to try and get ahead of the EAB. The real answer is just cut the trees down. And this is not a problem specific to Wheeling. Every municipality in the area is having to deal with this. And certainly, again, why I'm speaking up now is because I put my initials on it, because I don't think that we really have a choice. As hard as it was for me to look at all these other expanded level sheets and then sign one for little bugs, it was difficult to swallow. However, as Tony has said, this is becoming a safety concern. There certainly is the aesthetic value of, do we want a community full of trees that are dying? And no, we don't, but more importantly, we don't want trees falling on people. And that's the reality of what's happening, and that's why we need to address it. And I don't know, there's more to be said, but that's why I signed it.
Well, and that's fair enough. I mean, I expected a simple answer to it, and that's fine. On to water meters. I believe that you're, based on when we talked about this months ago, that once you start replacing the meters in more or less the industrial park, you're going to put correct size meters in there, and therefore the actual level, the income level, should be a lot larger, you're saying, because the correct meter is in there. We'll be billing out the proper water supply.
The new meters that'll be going in, which they've started doing the industrial areas a couple of weeks ago, they're still on the pilot program, but those meters will be sized accordingly to the service line and the use that's in there. So the low flows will be monitored, and hopefully we'll be picking up those low flows. And conversely, high flows too. If there's a building in there that's using more water and we had a smaller meter in here, we increase the size to make sure we capture the true reading of the usage.
So there's real good potential you're still seeing that?
We're hoping to, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee here.
Yeah, one quick question back to the emerald ash borer. The cost, what's going to be the cost for replacement trees? When is that going to be figured out?
The current cost for replacement trees due to prevailing wage is about approximately $400 a tree. That is for the cost of the tree and for the tree to be planted by our contractual tree planting.
Thanks.
Have anything else? Do we have anything else? Do you have something,
Sure.
trustee Jers?
Thanks.
Okay.
I don't know how we handle this. I really don't. I don't know how your department does it. I really don't. I think out of all the departments, here's an example here that it's probably the most scariest example. This department is run understaffed 25%. They've taken 25% reduction in staff, and they continue to run 5, 6 departments out of there. I don't know how you guys do it. And your overtime is minimum. You guys budget less than $100,000 a year on overtime, and you don't spend 20% of it. We're lucky we didn't have the snow, but even in 2010 when you did.
In 2010,
You didn't spend it.
We didn't spend it all, and we had
So I don't know what you're doing, Tony.
take comp time rather than the overtime.
I really don't know how you're doing it. I really don't. And then we have fleet services who goes over and beyond to try to make things, I don't think you're giving Band-Aids to our equipment, but you're making them last a lot longer. You're doing things. You've helped the airport tremendously. I mean, broom sweepers for snow at the airport, a new machine would cost over $500,000 to purchase. For $25,000, $30,000, you refurbished it, and we're getting years more life out of it, and they look great, okay? These are huge things. And I don't know how you're doing it, Chuck, because you've had fellows that have been sick. Yeah, I just don't understand. I really would like to see, John, in the upcoming year, you took some monies out of seasonal. I think these kids have been a real big help to you guys. Their bodies out there. I know, Lori, you and I have talked. Thank God for some of these kids that come out here, and just an extra body out there to help you. I like to see those dollars go back. I like the idea that was presented by Fleet Manager Spratt, is to please try to give me some clerical help here. It makes sense. It really does. Because this department is actually generating some dollars to offset expenses there. And I don't know how you put the burden on this guy. I really don't. There's nobody there. I mean, you got a couple of mechanics there, and this guy trying to juggle everything around there and look for grants and take care of other governing agencies out there. And I like the point that we're getting part-time in there to fulfill a need and a hole in your department over there without costing us any pennies. I think that's got to be the philosophy, and that's something I think we'll talk this afternoon about on how we operate our business here, our organization here. You need bodies to do work. And you know what? No offense to the public works guys, like myself, we're all getting older. Scotty, we're all, Chuck, I mean, you're all, Mike, you're getting older, and there's only so much you can do. But you need bodies, and the demand, I think, in our community, that's with your department, Tony. I don't know how you guys do it, but I know how you do it. You got a team. Tony, you're not doing it. Your team's doing it.
That's right.
And you know, it is. And you can disagree to disagree, but together you're getting the job done. Just like the fire and police department, you guys are there too. We've had some disasters in the last 5, 6 years. Real emergencies. So, John, I don't want to go into much of that, but I think some dollars have to go in there. I don't know if you want to do a consensus on maybe the part-time thing at least and the fleet thing, but I think we got to come up with a game plan for next year, John, maybe on a workshop to sit down and you talk to the department over there and see what adjustments can be made. How can we give them some help? Because you know what, for the last 4 years, now going on 5, they are operating with a 25% reduction in staff. And they've been doing it. And that's getting old. So
I would just like to, and this is, believe me, this is not the time to bring it up. Well, maybe this isn't. But when we talk about seasonal help, temporary seasonal, meaning 6 months, less than 1,000 hours. Years back, when I told the board that we were going to be looking for some more seasoned personnel, some guys that maybe were out unemployed, CDL drivers. I didn't realize the salary range had not been increased for 10 years, 8 years. The salary range for temporaries is 10 to 12, and we need to maybe make an adjustment because we can't hire those people at $12. If it comes, when it comes up, so we can talk about those. I don't know when it gets talked about. That's all I got.
I think that's between you and HR and a dollar amount that's budgeted for the entire line item. What you do with that dollar amount is determined by all parties involved, in a nice way. Because things are different, he's right. They are different. So, okay.
Do you have anything else?
One more, Madam President.
Yes.
Tony,
Trustee Brady.
when we were over at Scanlon's party last spring, you showed me what I really never really took a close look at as the condition of our streets. I mean, I never believed that Park Avenue was so deteriorated that you could break your leg just getting out of a car along the curbs. And, you know, I noticed you're looking for, to rent some equipment to kind of stay ahead of these type of things until that street's ready for a total rework. Let me ask you, explain that a little bit to me, how that would work and how you'd man it.
Well, this is a program that I was looking to, this would be like a pilot program. This is a program like Arlington Heights instituted, I believe it was about 4 or 5 years ago. They started out with something small like this. And what this program does is it uses in-house personnel. You use a larger grinder. Currently we have a 2-foot grinder we have on a Bobcat. But they use a larger milling machine to go in and they mill along the curb line. And then they use a power box and then they rent that and then they just lay the asphalt on and roll it back in. And they do it with in-house personnel. They have increased it. Originally started about $150,000 a year with them. They currently budget about $600,000 a year now to do this in-house work. Because certainly our street programs, when we go in, we do entire areas. We do our MFT projects are subdivisions. We do not go and spot and do a bunch of patchwork with MFT money. It just doesn't make sense. We need to get these larger subdivisions done, but in the meantime, we have to do some maintenance to these other streets, as you said, like on Park, and they're all over like that. Valley Stream, Beverly, they're like that, and we just don't have the equipment to do it efficiently. Where if we go in and we mark out and we figure out what we've got, then we can rent the equipment for a week and go in there and get it all, get a certain amount of work done with it.
Ever since that day, as I drive around town, all neighborhoods, I notice our streets are in bad shape. You drive down a street and it looks nice. I mean, it looks like it's a good condition. And all of a sudden, you'll come up to an area maybe 10 foot wide by 20, 30 feet long, just totally alligated. It's almost gravel. And this is the type of things you're talking about.
Right.
You could take that out and patch it and make that street last for another year or two without any reconstruction until the time comes when it is to rebuild it. Would you have enough people now, or would you going to have to hire people to do this?
Well, if we did it, of course, we would use our seasonals. We would make sure that we had enough people. We wouldn't do it without the people we have.
What do you think the cost savings would be on this overall? Have you done any? I know extending the life of the street is certainly worth a lot of money, especially when you have as many patches as streets that we have that are in bad shape, residential streets.
Well, I don't know if I can put a dollar amount on what it'll save. It saves us the reconstruction, hopefully, of the whole street at some point. If we can't get the water off the street, and it's just between the curb and the street, because the street's down 3 inches or 4 inches, that water just permeates through the base into the sub-base. Once it gets into the sub-base, the garbage trucks, when you drive down the street, you'll see that now it's humped. Material, the road, the asphalt is humped up higher than the curb. Now the water can't get into the curb because you've got a lip there along the curb, and there's that where it ruts. It actually creates a rut along the curb line.
Park doesn't even have any asphalt. I mean, it goes right to the gravel. I mean, it's amazing how bad it is. I don't think we should be so hasty to turn this program down.
Trustee Brady, if I can add a little bit to this.
Yeah.
I don't want to get lost in the minutia of what good would come of doing street repairs, because clearly it's a necessity, it's a priority. Street repairs have to be done. So accepting that fact, this comes down to the same question that we have about every service in every department. Do we do it in-house or do we outsource it? I didn't sign this because I don't see spending $145,000 on a piece of equipment as being the right answer. We need to patch the streets. We can do that. We don't need to do it in-house. As Trustee Argyris just said, this department is already stressed. I didn't see how they could keep up with their normal duties by adding this on top of it. So I think the service can still, I think an amount of money perhaps that can go back into the budget that can specifically deal with street repair, I think is a good idea. I don't think that buying additional equipment, even if it's renting, I understand, I don't see it as an efficient use of money. But again, the priority is getting the streets repaired so that, exactly as Director Stavros said, we can save money by extending the years between having to do full reconstructs. So I agree with that. It's how you accomplish the job.
Well, you let it both ways. In my estimation, in observing what the street condition is in the community, we're falling way behind. I never realized that before until just this year.
That's a great point, which comes, and we know we're going to talk about it this afternoon, about taking money out of the CIP. That is a real problem, and it goes back to Michael's presentation this morning about the true costs, the true deficits. You know, we saw a balanced budget this year, but it's not a balanced budget because we took a substantial amount of money out of the CIP. And that addresses exactly what you're talking about. Our streets really are starting to fall apart, and that's what happens when you borrow money from the CIP, or don't allocate money to the CIP and instead put them in your general fund to pay for the rest of our expenses. So I think this all ties nicely together, but specifically for this, it's a means to an end. How do we get there? And I didn't feel this was the right way.
I got a quick question, if I may. Wouldn't an expense like this come from the MFT fund? Versus, why would it be part of the general fund? Can we use MFT dollars to fund this piece of equipment, or
you can also
pay for the
use
program?
MFT funds to just pay a contractor to patch the street.
Well, you need to get numbers then. Let's see what
Sure.
the benefit is.
I mean,
By
and
going
I certainly
outsourcing
don't want
or
to
doing
argue,
in-house.
and I don't want to disagree.
No,
but
I'm
this
not
to
saying
me is
that.
a
But I'm thinking, you know what,
waste of money.
it's more than just a piece of equipment then. What is the overall plan? And what would this piece of equipment or the dollar amount cover for 2013? Another workshop. Well, whatever.
Trustee Brady, do you have any more?
That's it.
Okay.
Does anyone else have anything? Thank you, Mr. Stavros.
Thank
Thank you for the wonderful departments that do everything.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
You want to get a consensus on that pink item? Or we want to talk about it later?
Chuck?
Well, I think on the pink item, I don't
Which
think
one?
we want to do a consensus because we asked to get some other additional information, how you're going to save and how you're
Yeah, this.
Chuck?
And if you're going to get a
She thinks you're talking
consensus
about the
on here,
Not the
are you going to
equipment.
need more people?
Not the equipment. I'm talking about the clerical thing for fleet, for Mr. Spratt.
I'm sorry.
I agree with the other, what you're saying, but this one I had brought up on 166.
The part-time employee
That I believe he really
on
needs.
page 166?
Yes, ma'am.
We didn't have a lot of discussion, but if we'll have the consensus. You want to hire a regular part-time employee, 20 hours, page 166. Trustee Heim?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes, I think it's needed.
Trustee Agiris?
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Brady?
Absolutely.
Trustee here?
Sure.
Trustee Lane?
Tough one, but yeah, I agree.
Difficult for me also because there's,
Replaced Eddie.
I think some of the others were important also, but I think this is important, so yes, I agree also.
Thank you.
The time now is 12:10. We will break for lunch. returning at 1:10. I don't think I need a motion, but do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by trustee Lane, second by trustee Vogel. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We will convene at 1:10.